talk to everybody on the board about it quietly before we really go at it, before we really dig into it.
Everybody take your seats. We're going to go ahead and start.
How you feel? Got a full house now. Really, James had to call in.
Welcome back after our lunch break, everyone. I hope others here were able to go down to the Digital Teaching and Learning Legislative Day. That was a really fabulous experience, and getting to see what our educators are doing with our students and what our students are doing with the opportunities they have was quite remarkable. I think all of us thoroughly enjoyed it and really got a lot out of it. So it was a longer lunch and made for a little more awkward schedule, but it was well worth it, and we're very appreciative we had that opportunity. So thank you for bearing with us. We now proceed to the Student Learning and Achievement Committee report, led by Mr. Buxton.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Members of the board, Dr. Oxendine and I lead the Student Achievement Committee. We have a full agenda. Let me go over a few of the items because we're going to make one change. We'll start out with our presentation from the Southern Region Education Board, and then our career and technical education leadership here on Perkins. And then we will, Mr. Chair, without objection, I'd like to pull the response to the literacy framework item, which also includes the birth to 12th grade literacy framework that we had requested last month. This one, as Dr. Oxendine have talked about and talked with staff, this one's just not really ready for prime time. And so we have, I think, a document that we need some significant work done, and I think another month we're going to need as we work also with our legislative leadership. So we will pull that item without objection. Hearing
no objection, so ordered, and we will revisit it next month.
Thank you. We'll also then go into a quick update, and this will be a brief update on the College and Career Ready Graduate initiative, and then into a number of first reading, action on first reading and action items, which I'll preview as we get there. But first we're going to start out with Dr. Stephen Pruitt from the Southern Region Education Board. And Dr. Pruitt, if you'd come on up, I want to say a few words of introduction about Dr. Pruitt and SREB, and then why we've asked SREB to be part of this. Some of you may know Dr. Pruitt from his tenure as Commissioner of Education in Kentucky, at a time when Kentucky was doing a lot of very strong work in a number of areas, this being one of them. Some of you may know him from when he was at the department leadership team in Georgia, times with Achieve, and a number of other areas. So Dr. Pruitt has been a leader on these issues in a number of our states and a number of different perspectives for many years, not to age you, Dr. Pruitt, but someone who has a lot of experience in these areas, both on the ground as, I think, a science teacher way back when, but also as a state chief.
That was the most important job.
Absolutely. Yeah. Dr. Pruitt and SREB have done a lot of work lately on kind of the changing nature of the economy in the South and the opportunities that we have with the Perkins reauthorization, but thinking more broadly about how it connects into other policy levers at states. And they have done, I think, a pretty landmark report. You have a copy of the executive summary, underprepared and unaware, that Dr. Pruitt's going to touch on a little bit. But this is going to help set up our conversation on Perkins 5 that Mr. Trey Michaels will come up and talk about afterwards and kind of broaden our perspective on some of the opportunities that sit before us. So, Dr. Pruitt, thank you very much for coming from Atlanta and wherever else you're heading in the South and being part of this today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank the board. Thank you for, sometimes I don't know if it helps that I have all this experience or if it makes people think I just couldn't keep a job. But either way, you know, it's been a fun ride. Thank you very much for letting me have some time with you this morning. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a little bit about some of the high points about the law itself, give you a little bit of context about why this is so important at this particular point in history. And I want you to understand that where this is coming from is a core belief that we have at the Southern Regional Education Board is that schools should be about preparing, should not be about preparing kids for everything. It should be about preparing them for anything. So as we approach this, it really is about the idea that kids should have opportunities. We talk a lot about the achievement gap, but it really boils down to an opportunity gap in many cases. Career and technical education is not for some kids. I believe actually that the thought behind CTE should be about for all kids, because I don't know about you, I've got a son that's about to graduate from college, and I really don't want him to move into my basement. I love him, and I love my daughter, but everything we do in K-12 should ultimately lead to a career. Now, for some kids, that's going to be after 4 years. For some kids, that's going to be immediately after high school. But what we have an opportunity to do right now is to rethink how we're approaching our high schools and even our middle schools a little bit. And then a new way to think about partnerships that extend into post-secondary that provide kids with a new opportunity. So some key similarities and differences I just want to share with you. You know, the law's purpose really stays the same. It retains a focus on improvement. There's a new purpose related to increasing employment opportunities for unemployed or underemployed. Now, I'm going to set a context with you in a moment with our unprepared and unaware report, but it really gives us a lot more opportunity here. The current structure and the funding streams stay pretty much the same, although they have added some specifics around Native American programs and tribally controlled post-secondary CTE institutions. A big part, though, that is new is the comprehensive local needs assessment. I think Trey's going to come talk to you about what's going on here in North Carolina around that. That's an opportunity, I think, that should not be missed. I actually think this is a really strong part of the law. It's an area that we are able to help if needed, but I think regardless of who does it, this is a real opportunity for our kids. So a key part to this, just like with ESSA, is around collaboration. So just if you could just indulge me for just a second, I like to lead with this. From an SREB standpoint, I hope all of you are familiar with us, but just as a little clarification, we were created in 1948 after the Roosevelt Commission stated that the South was the biggest economic liability in the country. And we were created by the 16 governors and 16 legislatures. We are what's called an Interstate Compact, which is a little different than a membership organization. What that means is that as a member of the Compact, you have access to our resources, and we act, the best analogy I've come up with, and my staff doesn't throw something at me when I use it, is when two states build a bridge between the two, they enter into an interstate compact that they will both take care of the bridge. SREB is an education bridge across the 16 southern states. And the reason we're there is because back when we were created, it was around the idea that we can do more together than alone. So collaborate is sort of in our DNA, if you will, but this is a particular opportunity that we have. And you know, if you think about how things have traditionally been done in state education, and I'm sure this has never happened in North Carolina. This is something that happens everywhere else. But you know, what happens is you'll have a federal statute or policy, and then you'll have state regulations, and you know, state disseminates those, and then districts make plans, and then schools implement, and a miracle occurs, and everything works great. And that's just not a model that typically works well. What we believe a little bit more in is that if you start thinking about what do you want your students to be able to do, what is the performance that you're looking for, and then you start thinking about policy. And then with policy, you start thinking about what other agencies are needed for us to really implement this well. And then what are the state agency accountability measures? How are we going to hold one another accountable? And then what are the partners that we need? And notice that all these multiple arrows pointing multiple ways, meaning that there's lots of opportunities for people to come together and have those conversations. And I believe if you do that, you actually see a change in practice. Because as you develop these new plans, you have to think of what's the point of the plan. If the point of the plan is compliance, or if the plan is a better future for your citizens. Now, I know that I'm sort of intentionally making a dichotomy there that nobody would ever say we just want to do compliance. But there is an actual conversation there. Because if you're going to do compliance, then just put your name on the one that you've already had submit it, and get used to your current position because you're going to stay there. If you really want to do the other, then you need to think about what is your asset map? Who are the people around the state that can really help move this forward, and build your team. And then set goals, build consensus, build your messaging, and build your champions. And then buckle up, because it's not going to be an easy road from there, because you're talking about change, and we know that when you move somebody's cheese, it gets to be a problem. So why is all this so important right now? What is it that really provides us this opportunity? And why is it that there's a sense of urgency? Well, we have a significant change in workforce that's coming. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but researchers at Oxford University are just one of the many people who basically say the future of the workforce is changing significantly because of automation and artificial intelligence. The days of teaching kids to spin wing nuts on the back of a Maytag are ending. You know, and I know that I'm intentionally being kind of dramatic with that. But we actually are at a place that we have to think about the future. Now, we have to balance today's needs, but we also have to think about what the future is going to be. And the kids that are in the pipeline now, especially the kids that are in elementary school now, we have to be thinking about what our offerings are going to be for them when they get to high school. We have a document that you've got the executive summary for. It's on our website called Unprepared and Unaware. And in short, what this does is we looked at adults ages 25 to 35. And for these individuals who currently are employed, they currently have jobs, and they currently think that they're doing pretty well. And they are. They're making a livable wage. They're taking care of their families. But the realities of this is that the 25 to 35-year-olds are in low-skilled jobs that will at some point go away because of the automation that's coming. Now, what we did also, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, we also took a look at the ages of their children. And that's going to be important for you guys. So, you know, when we start talking about automation and artificial intelligence, immediately people start thinking, will there be enough jobs? Because one of the things people have always talked about is, oh, robots are going to kick people out of their jobs. You know, there's going to be this, you know, dearth of jobs. Well, that's actually the wrong question to ask. Because the reality is that's not what's going to happen. We're not going to have robots kicking humans out. What it does is it actually opens up a whole plethora of other jobs. So actually the question we should be asking is, will there be enough people with the skills to fill the new jobs? That's actually the question we have to ask. You see, when you look at entry-level positions based on their educational attainment, when the Great Recession hit, people who had just a high school diploma lost 4.8 million jobs. If you had some college or associate's degree, 300,000 jobs were lost. And if you had a bachelor's or more, there were virtually no jobs lost. Now, since the recession has come back, we've seen where there's been a $3.5 million jobs gained if you had a high school diploma, 1.2 million in college or some, and 4 million in bachelor's or more. So in other words, people who had a high school diploma saw the loss of the jobs, and even though some of those jobs came back, they all didn't come back. In fact, when you look at this across from May of 2007 through 2010, and now the recovery through 2016, what you see is an incredible job loss of those that had the low-skill jobs of high school diplomas. And you'll see that at the end of the day, while they added 8 million jobs overall, when you had 7.3 million that lost their jobs, that is not a good outlook for the economy of the South. In fact, when you actually even break that down more into the employment losses and gains, we see that individuals who have only a high school diploma, only 80,000 people gained their jobs back from having lost them in the recession. Now, that's not because people didn't want to work. You know, this is not any type of indictment on, oh, this is people being lazy or whatever. The jobs simply weren't there. Because what happened is during the recession, industry found a new way to get that job done. And now there was no reason to bring them back. So when we think about this, we saw an 8.6 million job gain if there was a bachelor's or more, a net gain of 1.2 million jobs if there was some post-secondary. And post-secondary here can mean not just that they went to a community college, but also technical training. But overall, a net loss of 4.8 million jobs if you only had a high school diploma. High school diplomas can't be a goal anymore. They can't be the end. If it's a terminal degree, it's terminal. And that's just a reality. So, by 2030, 40% of the jobs are probably going to be taken over by artificial intelligence or by robotics. And that stands as a significant piece in our future. As we think about this, having students who are actually more able to be career-oriented, meaning that they can think and learn more about their job as they go, as opposed to just simply learning the skill. And Perkins 5 really affords us a great opportunity with that. Now, these folks that are going to be losing their job, because at this point you may be thinking, well, you're talking about these 25 to 35-year-olds. How does that affect a state board of education? Well, when you look at the ages of their children, at the same time mom and dad are losing their jobs, those kids are graduating high school. Students who graduate high school, whose parents are in low-skill jobs, are 10 times more likely to go after those same jobs. 10 times. That's not anything to sneeze at. So what you're looking at is a potential economic multi-generational cliff where mom and dad are losing their job, students are graduating high school not prepared. You're looking at possibly greater student debt if they go into post-secondary, because now mom and dad don't have a job, so the student is going to have to incur that either through their own debt, or they simply have to go into the system and go into governmental support. So we have to rethink how we're doing this, and we have to rethink our opportunities. So we have this unique opportunity where we have 3 federal statutes: the Every Student Succeeds Act, the Perkins 5, and WIOA. One of the key things is that we think about as we go forward is we have this unique opportunity to think about a unified vision for workforce in our states. And so one of the things I want to really press upon you today is thinking about how do you leverage these 3 different funding sources, but also how do you leverage the opportunities within those. We can set a lot of priorities, but if our funding doesn't match our priorities, hopefully you put a nice gloss on the report that you did for your priorities, because it'll look pretty. But whether you can actually move the needle on it will be a matter of whether you also are focusing your overall governance and funding structures. The Every Student Succeeds Act, you guys know very well. It's about K-12 education. It's about academics and well-rounded education in college and career readiness. Perkins 5 is about career and technical education. I personally think that while we have these statutes that are separate, the more states can do, and I think this is also well documented in the research, the more we can do to blur the lines between these, the better off we'll be. I will just share a very quick anecdote with you that, so I was a chemistry teacher, I was a science teacher, and I had, every year I taught 1 to 2 AP chemistry courses. One of the smartest kids I ever taught, I had him in first year chemistry and an AP, and begged his parents to take health occupations. He wanted to be a doctor. And his parents would not let him because, you know, that was a CTE course. And that might look bad on his diploma. For 2 years, we met with his parents trying to convince him that it will not hurt his opportunities to get into college if he takes a career and technical education course. They finally agreed. And he will tell you today, as he is now working on his 2nd MD at Vanderbilt, working on something that I can't pronounce in a neonatal ward, that he learned more from being in those courses because he understood the full spectrum of what goes in the medical field. So he has a better appreciation for what our nurses do. He has a better appreciation for what all the different technicians in the medical field do, because he took those courses. So blurring the lines and actually helping kids understand the options that are out there and available for them gives us a greater opportunity and prepares them for anything. Secondary and post-secondary, we actually have with Perkins a great opportunity for partnership between K-12 and post-secondary to address the needs of this full, this thing that's coming by 2030 is not it's not a thing that we need to fix K-12. It's not a thing we need to fix adult ed. It's actually a thing that we have to look at that full spectrum. And college and career readiness, just like ESSA. Now, the part that people typically don't talk about as much, because this is not in the education realm, is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is WIOA. This is about secondary and post-secondary education. This is about youth and adults. It's about workforce training and career readiness and success. Now, that's not under your purview, but one of the things that I think is going to be really important is that there's a new conversation that's open between these three key pieces of legislation. So, we had this really weird thing happen with these three things. Congress actually wrote the three laws intending to overlap them. They actually have the same language. I don't know that I can remember in my career ever being able to say that about multiple laws at the federal level, that they actually all were very intentional. And so we have connection points over governance, over programs, over equity, which has got to be the center of your conversation. I will tell you, as important as these other things are, it's all irrelevant if we don't start thinking about each child and not all children. And that is actually an important distinction. Because when you think about each child, you think about the opportunity each child gets. When you talk about all, it's really easy to hide. Accountability, data, and improvement is an opportunity for us. And timing. So unlike in the past where once you submitted your plan, you're done, you have opportunities to rethink that. And I'm going to share that with you here in a moment. So when it comes to governance opportunities, state authority has flexibility. There is, the way things are funded, they have to include the K-12 SEA in all three. They have to include higher ed, and they may actually include Perkins and WIOA. Like there are ways that if we are very deliberate and we rethink some of this, it's a pretty awesome opportunity. Like there's a lot of people who don't even think about the fact that SNAP, the SNAP grant, which is usually in a whole other area, even provides, if we write our plans right, a way to feed our students who are in low-income areas when their parents are being trained for the workforce. That's something that people don't think about. But if we're thoughtful about it, we have a real opportunity with that funding. I do believe the governor has to be involved. This is an opportunity for the governor to really bring people around the table and think about how these things are aligned. Is it really a unified vision, or is it three different things doing compliance? Timelines, the plans cover multiple years, and there's opportunities for revision over and over. The funding has opportunities for coordination and also for flexibility. Again, I think there's an unprecedented time with how the law was written and the folks that are in place at this point that you can actually have some creativity with how you are approaching your various plans and how that funding works. Engagement is key. I go back to my earlier thing. You want to create champions. You want to create people who really understand it, and you want to create an opportunity for all those voices to be heard. Because here's the thing. You've got to balance today's needs with tomorrow's needs. So you're going to have workforce people who are saying, I need workers right now. And they do. But some of those workers they need right now, those same jobs won't be here in 10 years. So what's the plan for meeting the need now, but also training those people that while they're in those jobs, they actually have those opportunities to go forward? Involvement means that there has to be a genuine interest in what people are saying. You don't all have to agree. In fact, I used to have a rule that if everybody leaves a little bit mad, you're probably about right. That means nobody got their way completely, and you had an opportunity for everybody to get their say in, and they had some influence. Local grants, your grantees include your K-12 LEAs, in ESSA, in Perkins, your higher ed institutions, and is also there in WIOA. And you have an opportunity for coherence. Coherence is not a term, unfortunately, that we tend to see in federal plans, but you really got a great opportunity here. So some questions that you may want to consider asking is, how could state leaders work together to better streamline and strengthen all three plans? How could more stakeholders get involved in the work of all three statutes? Now, stakeholders is a word I use here because it's a word everybody understands. I'm going to pause here and just say, if I slip and say shareholder, it's actually because in my vernacular, I quit using the term stakeholder a long time ago because one is I did a little bit of just very brief research on where that word came from, and from what I found, it came from the P.T. Barnum days of the person that was holding the stake for the tent while someone swung a very large hammer near you, and you hope they had good aim. Shareholders to me is more reflective of our philosophy at SREB, that if you bring the people together, they invest in their time, they invest in what they believe in with you, and they become a shareholder in your future. What state legislation, funding, or programs could help integrate efforts into K-12, CTE, higher ed, and the workforce? Second opportunity is around programs. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through this entire slide, but programs are important because if programs become the single biggest thing, then my belief is you probably won't see the movement you want to have. But do programs, are they actually aligned to what's needed? So one of the conversations that's got to be had is, are the programs that are in our schools actually meeting the needs of our locals? Data here becomes very important. Are you able to actually answer the question, are our schools being able to provide the right training that they can actually go out and get those jobs? And are we forecasting properly? So some questions you may want to ask. How does, I think that might end up being a typo there. How does or could states incentivize opportunities for early post-secondary and career experiences? If there are legislative programs, or there are things that we can do to expose kids, even down into middle school, about what opportunities they have with their programs. So many kids have no clue about what their career choices could be. It's hard, and I think it's a place where counselors have to play a key role. But if that's going to be the case, then you need to rethink how you're deploying counselors, because our counselors are overburdened with so many kids. But also, I don't know how it is in North Carolina, but I know in Kentucky we had overburdened them with also being testing coordinators. Actually, they just passed some legislation that now limits the use of the counselor on other things to 40%. Now they have to spend 60% of their time actually being counselors, which is actually, I think, a quite good thing. How could state leaders collaborate better to improve content alignment and partnerships? What criteria are or could be used to identify high-quality early post-secondary and career experiences? So even down to the middle school, how can you expose kids to the possibility that, hey, you could actually go be X? So equity opportunities. Again, I believe this has got to be the focus. It's got to be the key thing that everything is considered about how to help each child. Statewide goals, you have to be deliberate. If you're going to have equity, you can't give it lip service. You've got to have real focus, and there have to be statewide goals, and there have to be measures of accountability. And there's got to be a focus on our historically underserved, our underrepresented groups, and those most in need. And one opportunity for us when it comes to equity across ESSA and Perkins is you also will hear your gifted and talented community talk about the excellence gap. But you know what? Gifted and talented kids come in all shapes and sizes, and that includes opportunities in career and technical education. Data is going to be critical. You've got to have a good eye on data and on your accountability. I think, if I remember right, North Carolina has career readiness as part of their accountability plan at ESSA, and that's great. But how is that actually going to mesh together? And then building capacity. Having people really in the field understand what all this really means for them and how they have to be very deliberate in their targeted support. So professional development for educators and technical assistance for local leaders really is going to have to address each and every child. And and not just the lip service of it. I will tell you that in Perkins, there's a very specific, just like there was in ESSA, that English language learners are specifically called out. And so that's going to be part of your plan as well. So some key questions to ask. How can we increase our focus on equity? One of the things I would push for you to consider is, when were our policies last written? So when you think about dual credit, for instance, dual credit was originally written done forever ago in a lot of states to give those gifted kids that extra opportunity. Well, now we're starting to realize that actually we were pretty narrow in how we were identifying gifted kids. So if your policy on how to do dual credit was actually written back in the 90s, probably you're not getting all the kids that should be available. So think about, how can we increase our focus on equity? Particularly where ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA overlap, what are the goals and expectations? Are the programs actually promoting equity? Are your data and accountability structures actually promoting equity, or are they just things you're reporting? And then building educator and program capacity. Those four things are really an opportunity for us to think about equity. And then, like I said earlier, do our regulations promote or inhibit equity? And when were they written? Because if that does have context. When something was originally written, it might have been right for the time, or at least perceived to be. The question is, are they still that way? Our accountability opportunities, you've got so much overlap here with ESSA. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, except to say, remember that Perkins 5 should be aligned to your ESSA plan. And thinking about the fact that Perkins does actually talk about academic achievement. It's not just about the career opportunity or the technical skills. It is about that academic opportunity. The reason that's there is because if you really want to teach students or train students to be good thinkers over the course of their career, the skills learned in the academic side are also critical. The attainment of credentials in secondary and post-secondary is part of the accountability, as is success in life. Are they able to actually get employment? Are they able to have a career versus a job? And then are they able to prosper? So when we think about accountability and data support, it is really about continuous improvement. Are you able to use data, use your programs? Are you able to support capacity, and then report and communicate about what's important in your state? So some key questions are, how could states improve data use related to readiness, success, especially credential attainment? Are your credentials actually meaningful? Or are you just, in Kentucky we had to move to a structure where we were having business actually tell us which credentials they valued, because this may be amazing to, probably never happened here, but we had accountability, we had career readiness as part of our accountability for about 6 years in Kentucky. And people were just having kids get credentials so they could get the extra points in accountability, but they weren't really leading to a career. I mean, you can get a credential in Microsoft Word. I would say, what job do you have today that doesn't require you know Microsoft Word? But I wasn't about to give credit for that as an industry certification. That was just me. I don't mean to downplay anybody else for Microsoft Word, but that was just, I felt like our businesses needed to tell us what they needed. How could states more closely align performance indicators for ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA? That's a very deliberate conversation. How could state leaders support more continuous improvement practices at all levels? So what's your plan for revisiting the plans? What's your is it just going to be a perfunctory, here's what we're doing? Or is there really going to be a plan for how we do that? So your timing is another opportunity. Like I said, this is a way that you can actually update your plans. In fact, WIOA was just updated in 2018, but there's an opportunity for those to continue to be updated, especially as ESSA and Perkins roll in. So there's a great opportunity here. You don't have to be set in stone. There's no concrete involved, unless you're bringing Culvers in for you to have some snacks while you're having these meetings. So what kind of questions should you ask here? When, why, and how have state leaders come together in the past to plan for K-12 CTE and workforce? And what can we build on? How could state leaders collaborate more in the future? And how can we be more innovative? So with that, I'm going to end, and I'm happy to take questions. I have no clue where I am on time, and I apologize for that. But it was a lot of information I was trying to throw at you quickly. But it is a great opportunity for us here in the South, and I think across the country, to really take the time. And it's hard. I mean, you know, the old saying, if it was easy, everybody would do it. It is hard. It's hard work. And I know that the superintendent and his staff have worked really hard on their Perkins plan. I know that because I know him personally, and I know the kind of person he is. And I know how hard it is to be at an SEA, and you've got to answer to everybody. Because I can tell you, especially if you change credentials, oh man, my phone started blowing up when we started talking about stackable credentials. Yeah, I mean, it was hard. You know, I even got accused of getting a kickback because, you know, we were having to have these extra credentials now. And, are you getting a kickback? Yeah, because that happens in state government lots. It doesn't end up in the media. You know, I mean, so it's hard, and you're going to come under some fire. But I want to encourage you that it's the right thing to do for children. And that, I know, is what the focus of this board and this administration is about kids. So with that, I'll pause and either sit down or take questions.
No, stay right there. Stay right there. Dr. Pruitt, thank you. And I'd ask members of the board for any questions. It could be related to the underprepared and unaware report and some of the economic data that SREB has gathered for us on the South, or it might be on the mechanics of how we start thinking in a way that I'd say few states are doing around bringing ESSA, Perkins, and WIOA together. So questions of the board before we bring Trey Michaels up to talk about our specific work. Mr. Duncan.
Just an observation that I was interested about the certification on Microsoft Word, because we actually talked about that last month. So that was an interesting comment that we should perhaps think further about in light of the comment.
It's I will say that when you start getting into industry certifications, it's going to be a hard conversation. I believe that's why you've got to have that relationship with your business community. In fact, we actually found in Kentucky where there were some industry certifications that meant more in certain parts of the state than others. And so we actually even set up a tiered structure where if this industry certification meant more here than it did over here, then it didn't count over here for accountability, but it did over here. So there's ways to do that, but it's a hard conversation to have.
Well, maybe the question is, since Microsoft Word is an expectation in so many businesses to have the ability to do that, but it's not any longer viewed as anything special by way of certification, how do you assure that your students get that in addition to the certifications that would be valued by employers more at a premium, if you will?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's it's certainly a very valid issue, and the same can be said for other of those types of products as well. Being a science guy, there's a particular one that, you know, I loved it when a kid could actually come in and use a spreadsheet.
Just to thank you very much for a really comprehensive. I like the way the goal is worded for a better future for our citizens and economic development for our state, and I think that's what we're about. I think our mission statement and vision statement embraces that, but just a couple comments and then one question that I don't know if anybody here can answer or not, but we had a presentation a month or two ago by Caroline Sullivan, who is the director of the North Carolina Business Committee for Education, about the Navigator, and that's certainly a partner, a ready, willing, and able partner. They've already done a lot of work around this and have been a vehicle for that industry need, that needs assessment kind of work that we can do. So I hope we will actively engage with them and the work they've already done. And I appreciate Vice Chair Duncan's comment. I made a note that I think we talked about, you know, your ability to use PowerPoint and Word and spreadsheets is sort of like, you know, a lot of other skills that are assumed that we should be able to do. Most of us use that all the time. I'd like to know where we are, because when you mentioned counselors, that's an important part of this mix. So I'd like to know where we are, and maybe the superintendent could answer this better than anyone else. Where are we are we making progress with some funding for more of those support staff kind of people that we've talked about for, I'm going to just say, 18 years that I've been here, we've been needing that, but there's never been more urgency for the need for that. So I wonder where we are, Mr. Superintendent. Are you feeling good, like we're going to get more support staff, especially counselors, social workers, nurses?
Yes.
What are those numbers looking like?
Last year, we got $30 million for school safety efforts. We used that to get more counselors into our schools. Had a great conversation with the superintendent of Ashe County. They were actually able to get a school psychologist, which they otherwise would not have been able to afford for their district, and they're just really pleased with the results. Working on making sure we get more money and that it's recurring, and then also supported the community college's request for career coaches, which has been a great program, and working to expand that throughout even more schools, which will help students know all the pathways to success.
Mr. Ford.
Really briefly, thanks again for the presentation. I had the pleasure of meeting you a couple months back in Atlanta for Seek Common Ground, so thanks for being here. We talked a little bit about the continuous improvement piece. I'm just interested in, I think everybody here is of the same mind, where we don't, want to create a plan that sits on a shelf or do something that, we end up looking at but don't end up revisiting. So are there any particular models around continuous improvement that you would recommend to make sure that the stuff is operationalized?
The way I would, probably the best way I would recommend it is as a part of your strategic plan for the board, is set up very specific times that you're going to revisit, and perhaps even do a deep dive into it. I mean, I know what it's like when you're dealing with a board. You've got 1,000 things and you've got a huge agenda, and finding time to carve out is often difficult. But I think it's important. If you really are going to be committed to continuous improvement, then it starts with saying, here's what our accountability data is saying, and we're going to carve out this time during this month or year or whatever you choose to do, to take that and then have the real conversation with the staff to say, how can we as a collective group figure out how to move this forward? This is working well, this is not working well, what do we need? And that's where I think that, so I talk about asset mapping a lot. Asset mapping I think is a key to continuous improvement. And the reason for that is because if you do it on the front end, then you know who you can contact when you need to know why is this working or not, but also how to help them be the champion for that change. When you are making change in a state, it's really easy for it to be isolated to the boardroom. If you have a strategy that actually engages a full asset map, it means that you've got these voices that are constantly coming in, and you know specifically who you can go ask questions to. And it can also help because if you know who they go to Sunday school with, they might also have some ability to help you with other legislative actions or whatever. But when I think about continuous improvement, it's deliberate. It's part of a strategic plan, and it's put on a timeline that's committed to by the board and by the superintendent that says, this is the time we're going to really spend digging into this. And it may not be that you dig into the whole plan, because, if you dig into the whole plan, you also may not get that time. So it could also be that you say, over the course of 12 months, we're going to dig deep 3 of those months into these 3 areas. And there's different ways you could do it. You could identify those up front. You could also say, here are the things we see that are struggling, so let's do a deep dive on those. And I think you do it from the standpoint of going in to say, how can we help improve it, as opposed to, why is this not working? And I think that's how that collaborative spirit really works best. Does that help answer your question? Good.
Let's do one more. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you very much. I think I met you several years ago. We were talking about hands-on science at a conference.
That's very possible, yes. I've spent a lot of time talking about that.
You were really intriguing me with your comments about how in the state of Kentucky you had revised, or the state of Kentucky had revised science education. So I knew someday our paths would meet again. So here we are. My question goes back to what industries, the corporate world, private sector, is saying about, I'm particularly interested in advanced computer. What do they need in terms of advanced computer skills?
It's really interesting because there's a very definite need for coding right now. In fact, I will tell you that in my time in Kentucky, we started some initiatives around coding in particular in some of our areas of the state where they didn't have a lot of access to even to a community college. And because of how the family structure often worked in our more rural areas in Kentucky, you could actually get a job and stay in the area, and because that was a very important aspect, to give people that option. So we did some things with allowing AP computer science courses to meld with our career and technical education computer pathway courses, and had kids graduated with associate's degrees in computer science. So I think there's a definite need for that now, but the interesting conversation that I'm hearing is coding may actually become the new blue-collar job of the future. So again, this is where that balance of current need versus future need is. So if that's the case, and some of the things I've read and that my staff has researched is, when AI really becomes prominent, there's probably going to be a narrower need for people in the very high end of computer science, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be designing the AI. But there's going to be a greater need for people who are maintaining that AI through coding and other aspects of computer science. So I think it's a balance that people have to think about right now. Right now, we just need to get people to even understand what coding and computer science is all about. And those are two very different things, so that everybody's clear.
Yeah.
We use those two things simultaneously sometimes. But so there's that need now, but how can we in the K-12 system also entrench the idea of continuous learning, so that when kids maybe get that certification or degree in computer science, it's not just about coding, but it's also about how to apply that in a future methodology.
That's pretty fascinating, because downstairs in the exhibit this morning at 11 o'clock with all the students from around the state with their exhibits and their displays, I spent about 10 minutes very intrigued with a third grader who walked me through the definition of coding and some of the coding he had done. I just feel like I don't know anything about anything after this morning. I know zero. Thank you so much.
I've been there. I know the feeling.
We think you know more than zero.
It was very intimidating to me.
Dr. Pruitt, thank you very much. You've set a stage for us in kind of context of the economy that we're facing now, but also in the future, and how we need to be thinking about a more kind of strategic and integrated Perkins S&WO plan. So thank you.
Well, and I'd like to thank the board and the superintendent for having me. Please know that we at SREB, we exist to support you. In fact, I would say that one of the things I hope that you'll see out of SREB is a much more deliberate focus on helping SEAs and state boards. It's not been an area of focus for us really in the past, but my heart is with the SEA and always will be, and with Classroom. And so anything we can do, please don't hesitate to contact us. I am going to also apologize because unfortunately I have to head to the airport right now to get to my next stop. But I normally would stay and listen to more, and I'd love to get to meet each of you individually, but unfortunately I've got to jet, as they say. So thank you so much for your time, and appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. We're going to move right into the second new business item, which is our Perkins 5 plan and transition plan. I'm going to ask Mr. Trey Michaels to come up, and I think he's may have some member of his team here as well. Just setting the stage quickly, we are in a transition plan right now as we write our plan for Perkins 5. The transition plan does not need to be approved by this board. It does need to be signed by the governor. Dr. Pruitt mentioned the governor's role in this. It does need to be signed by the governor. We will not approve a transition plan, but we will be approving down the road our state plan, thinking about how these are coming together. So this is we're beginning to walk into the reauthorization around Perkins 5. So, Mr. Michaels.
Perfect. Thank you, and good afternoon, Vice Chair Duncan, Lieutenant Governor Forrest, Superintendent Johnston, State Board members, and advisors. I have to say, after hearing that presentation, no pressure, right? I don't take this job lightly. I value the opportunity that I have. I have a daughter that in 5 months will begin her middle school career. And she has selected, we toured a number of charter schools and her base school. She said, Dad, I really want to go to my base school because they have animal science. And I'm very proud that my daughter will be a CTE student. Maybe someday we'll bring her in as an FFA state officer. That's
No pressure.
No pressure. Exactly. So I do have a lot of notes that I want to share with you. I'll try and be brief and to the point. Stop me and ask questions as you need to. But as Mr. Buxton has already informed you, this is about our transition plan. So I will go rather expeditiously through this. If we want to set up time to do a much deeper dive, one thing that we did not have earlier was a side-by-side of the law that we have today relative to the changes in the law that we will have tomorrow. We have that. We have several documents. We have one that covers the entire law. We have one that covers just the performance indicators, and we will get those to you after this meeting so that you can take a look at that, and we can spend more time on that if you'd like to in the future. I'd like to also introduce our CTE team who's been involved in our planning to date. And I'll just ask them to just quickly either throw a hand up or stand up if they could. Ms. Kimberly McDonald, our Section Chief for Assessment and Reporting. Ms. Dolores P. Ali, our Section Chief for Curriculum Acquisition, standing in our way. Ms. Carol Short, our Interim Assistant Director. Mr. Marty Toby, Section Chief for Regional Services. Stacia Solomon, our Innovative Project Administrator. And a special guest with us here today that is an integral partner, as you heard earlier today, as per law and just good business practice, Dr. Bob Whitsker, Director of CTE for the community colleges. Thank you for being here. So as you know, in July 31st, 2018, our Carl D. Perkins Act was amended by Congress, and we have begun planning for that. This act provides the state departments of education either submit a new state plan for 5 years or a transition plan by May 24th of this year. We have chosen to work with our partners at the community college, and we have drafted a transition plan for submission this year. This transition plan will effectively allow North Carolina to continue operations as it has for the prior 12 years, while effectively and thoughtfully planning new operations for the 2020-2021 year. The transition plan and a transition budget was attached to your notes in an executive summary, so you have that at your disposal. During the transition plan year, secondary NCCTE will determine 3 key points: the definition of concentrator for the purposes of the new act, the program quality measure to be reported in addition to other identified measures by the federal government, and an effective comprehensive local needs assessment for local program improvement. You've heard about all 3 of these things previously, but we have had several meetings to make sure that we begin that process. A couple quick notes about funding. Per General Statute 115C-158, the State Board of Education allocates funds through cooperative agreements between NCDPI and the North Carolina Community College System. The NC State Board of Education is the fiscal recipient from the federal government. These funds are currently split at 66.67%. They were very intentional with 67% for secondary programs and 33.33% for post-secondary programs. In 2017-18, secondary programs in CTE accounted for just over 900,000 participants, while post-secondary accounted for just over 92,000 participants. We have developed a visual timeline for the new state plan development, and we'll share that with you after the meeting. But I'll walk you through the details succinctly now. It outlines a development cycle of the plan itself through September of this year, followed by a public comment period between October and December. We will make adjustments and corrections to the plan through February 2020, at which time it will be presented for discussion before this board, then rest for an additional 30 days and be submitted to Octay no later than April of 2020. Again, we have a nice colorful visual of that we will send to you after this meeting. We've had multiple stakeholder input sessions already, and anticipate much more stakeholder engagement, or as Dr. Pruitt put it, shareholder engagement. As we draft the plan through September, currently we've had about 13 input sessions with different stakeholder groups. We have focused on those stakeholders that will execute this plan locally to make sure that it works for them as we start to make critical decisions and move forward. Any questions on any of this before we begin the slide deck? Great. Yes. So as I've already mentioned, this is the act that was signed into law July 2018. We will use the transition year of 2019-20 as our transition year. We will use that year of planning to collect data in new fields from LEAs, analyze that data, evaluate it, and then set new baselines for performance indicators. Additionally, we will be building completely new, clear career pathway programs of study, providing a clearer picture for parents, students, business communities, post-secondary, etc. And we'll show some examples of those in just a few minutes. During this year, we will also be working with our partners at the community colleges to provide a memorandum of understanding for them to use in LEAs with local service area providers at the community college to ensure that there's a clear path for a student to understand how to move from 5th grade career awareness to 6 through 8 career exploration to 9 through 14 career readiness. We have worked diligently with the 13 first groups to come up with our proposed definition of concentrator. You see it on the screen there. A CTE concentrator is a student who has successfully completed a concentrator course in an approved career pathway program of study. We're being very intentional with some of our language there. We then go on to say the definition of a concentrator course. A concentrator course is defined as a 2nd or 3rd level course that builds upon skills acquired in a prerequisite course. To set some context, currently we require 4 courses for a student to be called a concentrator in CTE. That picture is typically a little skewed and somewhat confusing for stakeholders. Federal law does now require a minimum of 2 courses in sequence. And as we spoke with all of our stakeholders locally so far about how they administer this and how they would administer under the new law, it became very clear to us that we would never reach agreement with local stakeholders as to whether we should go with 2 or 3 or 4 courses. So we landed on some middle ground. And we believe that the concentrator course being defined as a 2nd or 3rd level course that builds on skills acquired in a prerequisite course is a very nice compromise. We'll show you some examples of why that's important in just a minute. Any questions so far?
I do. I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
And maybe you'll, in a later slide, it'll reveal itself to me. But how long does it typically take to complete a pathway?
So currently now it is feasible for, depending on the pathway with a 4-course sequence, for a student to complete it. You know, it's possible for them to complete it by the end of their sophomore year, but most typically it would be in that junior year or senior year. It depends on some of the courses that they have beforehand, how they co-requisite courses, how they prerequisite courses, what the skills are that they come in with, currently what the path is that they've chosen. A lot of variables go into that. We believe that with this new definition, we'll actually allow a lot more students to concentrate with a little bit more focus, and they'll be taking the appropriate courses that match their career goals. So we're excited about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question about the focus groups and the makeup of the focus groups
Yes.
that you've been working with.
So far we have impaneled our local directors multiple times, and we have met, we presented this at the Chief Academic Officers meeting as well back about a week ago.
Thank you.
So again, we really targeted those folks who would be the executioners of this mission locally to make sure that what they could execute is something that we could build out for
That's
them.
what I was just thinking.
So the first big thing for us to decide on is the concentrator example, or the concentrator course defined, and next up is a couple of examples. Don't want to go past those. All right. So I mentioned to you a second or third level course requiring prerequisite skill. Here's a great example of our project management career pathway program of study. For a student to be successful and have quality skills that they can walk away from a high school setting with in project management, what we have built out would require a child to take Project Management 1 as a prerequisite to Project Management 2. In this case, the orange box there, the Project Management 2 would be our Concentrator course. So if an LEA could only afford the opportunity to provide these two courses, we believe that's enough for the child to walk away with a very firm foundation in project management. If you're familiar with project management, it's about 300 hours of study to sit for one of the exams. In this situation, that's about 300 hours. If an LEA wanted to require a course in front of that, that would be an enhancement course or a supplemental course, if you will, we would recommend Principles of Business and Finance. It would help set the stage for the student in a more global view of business and then launch them into some focus on project management. We also, as you see in the gray box, want to emphasize supplemental career employability skills courses. We recognize that many of our 9th grade students do go through career management. Many of our districts actually have that as state board or local board policy that students go through that. We want to make sure that that emphasis is there should they choose to add that to their local career pathway program of study. In this case, we have recommended that if they wanted to add a supplemental technical course, that business law would be that course. We emphasize our career and college promise options per local need. And then lastly, building forward and thinking about work-based learning, you see there 3 options if a child wants to pursue a more in-depth work-based learning opportunity. And in this case, that would be certainly very appropriate with project management. Questions on a second level concentrator example?
I wonder, my question has to do with, let's say, in a school system with several high schools, would the career pathways vary from one school to the other?
Yes, ma'am.
So there's really no standardization across the pathways for, let's say, a school system made up of 10 high schools?
Yes, they very well might offer different pathways. We do believe that that should be based on local business need. And our local plan does require that they connect to the local business community and make sure that they're providing exactly what they need to provide locally, and that the community college is also backing that up postgraduate. Yes, sir. Oh.
Mr. Wallace.
Correlation between career academies, the career academy approach, and what you're describing here. Is Career Academy goes a little bit further? They have more.
A little bit more
supplemental courses?
specificity, perhaps 4 courses, internships, et cetera. Yes, and those can be in different environments as well. Okay. They can be academies on, broken apart from a traditional high school, right. Or it can be I think it's our cooperative innovative high schools, actually on a community college campus. So there's a varying degree of opportunity there.
Okay. But they don't conflict.
They do not conflict.
Okay.
No, sir.
All
no,
right.
sir. And we would not want them to conflict.
Right. Exactly.
Not at all.
Okay.
I think Dr. Pruitt's example or discussion earlier about every child,
right.
Making sure that we meet every child's need is very critical.
Okay.
So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
The next one that we've got is on a 3rd level concentrator example. In this case, we have a situation where if a child wants to go down the business management path, we believe that it would behoove the child in their career planning that they start with the Principles of Business and Finance prerequisite, move forward into Business Management 1 or the IB Business Management class, and then move into a Business Management 2 for their concentration. Typically, a child in this situation is going to go on to a 4-year degree program. And we want them to have one extra course to really make sure that they set the stage appropriately for those skills as they move on. Again, you have some of the same supplemental career employability skills courses, technical courses, and career and college promise. What we could also substitute here, if you wanted to think about some of our construction trades courses, currently we offer a course called Core and Sustainable Construction. That would be your first prerequisite, followed by a Carpentry 1, and then a Carpentry 2, Masonry 1, Masonry 2, etc. Questions? So the next big thing that we must select in order to move forward with writing the plan is we have 3 options as our program quality measure: post-secondary credits, work-based learning, or post-secondary credentials. We find significant value in working to build a system to articulate, record, and track post-secondary credits. We believe that the Navigator, as mentioned earlier today, work-based learning tool is a platform that will greatly enhance our ability to follow successful work-based learning and assist us in setting expectations for a quality and equitable system in time and in the future. But at this time, we do believe that we are best positioned to select and report on post-secondary credentials. We do, however, as was brought up earlier today, recognize and realize the need for a significant and intentional realignment of our current inventory of recognized post-secondary credentials. We will enlist a committee of stakeholders, post-secondary members, business and industry, subject matter experts, etc., to vet and renorm our list, as well as our tier alignment for teacher bonus payments. I hope that's helpful. Additionally, we will utilize the other option, as you see below there, to continue accountability measures for non-concentrator courses, and as we revise each course, consider alternative assessments. We recognize that we are in a day and age with computer technology and AI that we can simulate a lot of the things that we need to simulate, and that those are quality opportunities for proof of learning of a student, much more so than a 100-item multiple choice test. The last thing I have for you today is one of our most important. And if I look back at Marty Toby, our section chief for regional services, forgive me, but he is my rock in this regard because he is spearheading this effort. He is actually on a team of people that will begin driving a national discussion around the comprehensive local needs assessment. And we are very fortunate to have him on staff. We are very well positioned for this given our history with our current local program improvement tool. We do have that. That's been in place for a number of years. So we already have the buy-in into the whole notion of a comprehensive local needs assessment. We have the staff expectations and et cetera. So the nuts and bolts of this, it must be completed by the eligible recipient at the beginning of the grant period and updated at least every 2 years. It includes at least these 5 elements each time you review this. Student performance on the performance indicators, including subgroups. Again, there's a long list of performance indicators that I will send to you after this meeting so that you can take a look at those. We're very interested in performance. We already track a number of these performance indicators, including academic attainment, but those will be listed on that document. We also want to make sure that programs are of sufficient size, scope, and quality to meet the needs of the students that are served and the labor market demands. We are in the process of working with our national partners to define sufficient size, scope, and quality, which is kind of a nebulous thing to put a handle on, but there's a lot of national discussion around that so that we can have some quality in that moving forward. Additionally, progress toward the implementation of CTE programs and the programs of study, thus the discussion of the overhaul of our career pathway programs of study, making sure that they are tied heavily to business partners and community colleges. Number 4, improvement in recruitment, retention, and training of CTE professionals, including underrepresented groups. We will have assistance in identifying the underrepresented groups. I want to emphasize here that this is all CTE professionals at the local area, not just teachers, but local administrative staff as well. And number 5, progress toward implementation of equal access to high-quality CTE courses and programs of study for all courses. And I think that just goes without saying and adding extra emphasis. There's an enormous amount of appropriate emphasis on equity, and equity cuts across so many things that we do in CTE. Access to programs, access to facilities, access to materials and resources, etc. That is the end of my slide deck. If you have questions, I will gladly field them. I may solicit help from our staff.
Thank you, Mr. Michaels. Again, we're kind of at the beginning of this process and a chance for us to just understand where we're headed, a plan that's going to be written over the course of the next year. A lot of stakeholder or shareholder input, but want to make sure we have a good sense of where this is going and chance for your questions to be answered about, again, either process or content as we're moving forward. And I'm going to start with one kind of clarifying question and then open it up. If you listen to the conversation in states across the country, career pathways is kind of one of the bingo words that you'll get everywhere. It is used with lots of different definitions. So for the board, when we hear you say career pathways, make sure we're using the definition you want to have in our head.
Great. So I believe, and we will, that's a great question. So we need to probably make sure that I'm saying this because I know they're going to take notes behind me, make sure that we define that for ourselves as a state. And our belief is that career pathway starts with awareness in 5th grade, aligned seamlessly through exploration in 6 through 8, and then readiness 9 through 14, until that child becomes a person that participates in our workforce in a fruitful and productive manner.
Okay, so we can get that at some point because we're not going to remember all
Yes,
that. But
yes.
the pathway from Perkins is whether it's 5 through 12 or 6 through 12, it's a through 12 pathway. It doesn't necessarily articulate to a community college program of study, or does it?
It should.
Okay.
And that's one thing that we're going to be very intentional about. And that's the great thing about having such great partners like Dr. Witchker. We have been together through most of our meetings as we've planned. We've been to a lot of the national meetings together, and it's a great collaboration. So we are going to be very intentional about that. And that memorandum of understanding at the local level is something to really help our local stakeholders plan with their local service area community colleges to make sure that what the local business needs are matches up to what the middle schools, high schools, and post-secondary opportunities are to train those workforce members.
So that articulation, I think, is a pretty exciting where we're going kind of focus in terms of a kid who goes through a program of study or a career pathway in middle school and high school and then has a direct pathway into a credential or degree.
Yes, sir.
In that same pathway.
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Let me get any questions again, process or content. It was a thorough presentation, so
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that. Mr. McDevitt.
JB, I think this is a process question. I'm trying to in my mind overlay, I'll say blur the lines, to use the term he used earlier, blur the lines of the earlier presentation with this one. And to assure that as we move forward, you can say this almost every time there's a presentation. You could say, here's what we're hoping we get from each child. I think there were 2 profound things I heard, Stephen, earlier in 2 terms. One was blur the line, and one was each. And so finding that sweet spot, which I think we have always searched for, to assure that those who might just need to helicopter in and not be on that pathway, but have that opportunity for some understanding of CTE for life. We are not only talking career and college ready, but we're also talking about preparing citizens. And so assuring that, my dad made sure I could do that, but I couldn't do it anymore. When I asked for money to change the plugs, he said, do it yourself. And you did. But I'm not so sure, that you can't do that anymore. Shade tree mechanic is gone. He referenced the doctor thing earlier today. Evidence is real clear that those doctors who have a sound, basic understanding of the liberal arts make better doctors. And I'm saying that because I'm trying to figure out how we're going to blur these lines so that kids can learn and unlearn and relearn, but that also that they can understand historical context of where we are, and that we don't have kids who have an understanding here and industry certification and credentialed, but couldn't tell you what NATO means or could not tell you how to, and you know, I'm not indicting the current folks. I think we must have done that a few decades ago, and we've got to find I think a way to, back to the earlier presentation, to find a way to blur those lines. So I hope the process will encourage that. And at the same time, you know, I know what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is saying about skill levels necessary to fill the jobs. And the skill levels, U.S. Chamber says that the skill level for entry-level job and entry to colleges essentially the same. And so that's a comment that it's real important, I think, particularly today, that we not only understand how to do a PowerPoint. I don't think we have to be, even I can do that, and I'm, as I said one time, roadkill on the information highway. And but the evidence of being able to have that, I mean, it's really trying to say we want all of the above, and then as soon as you get all the above, be ready, because it changes. And you better understand that all of these things change. So I'm just talking about process in terms of assuring, because some state's going to do this right. Mm-hmm. And when they do it right, I think that state's going to be a real leader. And I think it's real unfair to be preparing kids in either line. I mean, you know, when I was in school, you know, there was the college prep. You remember those? Mm-hmm. College prep. And then you had the other, I think there was a business line, and then there was and really kind of focused on those. And so I'm trying to kind of figure that out, how we're going to do what he talked about earlier in a real way.
And I think one of the things that'll be really impactful for us is we currently have a cluster model. We follow the 16 career clusters. Now we'll continue to report by the 16 career clusters. But inside of those career clusters are very nebulous pathways that are very confusing and do not make a lot of sense to really drive a child, should they choose to be driven down a career pathway program of study. So we believe by extrapolating those out and showing clearer paths, students can find the opportunity to go down a career pathway, or find an opportunity to hop in and hop out. As I stated earlier, we have about over 900,000 participants annually. And when we really get down to it, we only have about 54,000 children that actually concentrate. So we do have a lot.
I'm sorry, give me those numbers again. What you have?
Over 900,000 participants and
yeah.
54,000 concentrators.
Okay.
So we do have a lot of participation.
Yeah.
What we would like to see is more opportunity for children to concentrate without looking at a commitment of 4 exact courses, some of which are helpful and some of which are nice.
I hope we'll do it the other way too, mm-hmm. that we have a number over here that say, I don't need that. They do.
Yeah.
You know, they do. They do need that understanding of the career, the CTE, some credentialing. You know, quite frankly, if I was waving a magic wand, I'd say every student ought to be credentialed in something, and then everyone ought to have an understanding of history in our context.
And I appreciate that. And some of that will behoove us to work on our branding. How do we sell this most appropriately to 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders? And then how do we also make sure that our middle grades model, which needs an overhaul, and we're working on that, is positioned appropriately so that local directors can offer more opportunities to more children.
Do one more, Ms. Cannons.
Well, we heard Stephen talk about, as a teacher, urging his student to take a path that the student was not thinking was appropriate. And yeah. I think it goes back again to Tricia's comment about you've got to have someone guide these students and help their parents probably understand, in many cases, what the options are and what is advisable for them to do to help them navigate this. And that's got to be a piece of the whole thing.
Yes, ma'am.
Michaels, thank you. Appreciate, and to you and your staff and folks who were in here with us today. A lot of work to come, and I think a lot of focus that we'll have on how this stuff gets braided together. So the board, the department, commerce, community college system, we're all working together on this ESSA Perkins We Owe a marriage that we can do to support the performance that we hope for our kids.
Okay, well, thank you all.
Appreciate it. All right, our third new business item, again, we are pulling, which is the early literacy framework. We're going to get some more work done on that and get that ready for your attention next month. The college and career ready update, graduate update, which is a last new business item. I'm just going to do the update from the table. You have in the materials a PowerPoint presentation that gave you an update. This has been an item that we looked at for a number of months ago. This is where we've got courses, excuse me, let me say that a little differently, that we have an effort to ensure that we are getting kids college ready, especially those who aren't assessed as college ready, to go into college ready to move into credit-bearing coursework. This has been a negotiation for some time between the community college system and the department in exactly how this is going to be rolled out. There are still some gaps, as you might remember last time from the report that went over the General Assembly and then the addendum that the department asked that we send on its behalf. We are planning a meeting coming up that is going to have community college system representation and department representation. I will represent you at that meeting, and we're going to attempt to get the ball moving a little bit further down the field. So that's a coming attraction. I think everyone is committed to implementing this program in a way that's consistent with the spirit of the legislation, the letter of the legislation. We've got a little bit more work still to do here, so I just wanted you to be aware of where that is, since that's been a board conversation a number of times. All right, let's get to our action agenda. Action on first reading, SLA 1. This is the Committee of Practitioners Advisory Committee. Dr. Wells, why don't you come up? You have in your materials some information on this committee. This is our guidance for the board on ESSA. We need to put our practitioner advisory committee together. There will be some technical tweaks, I think, Dr. Wells, with our ESSA plan that we need to have this committee together. I just ask you to make a few brief comments on this, and
sure.
Board members have the materials. We'll see if there are questions.
This is a committee that was actually established some couple of years ago when ESSA first came out of DC, and the committee was basically inactive after the plan was approved by the Department of Education about a year ago. It needs to be back reestablished. I have done some follow-up. A number of the folks who were on that committee have either retired from the positions they were representing or moved to other positions. So we need to fill in some of the vacancy gaps, as well as reappoint folks who have been on it before to provide advice to us as we take a look at the current North Carolina plan that has been, basically it's been implemented now for about a year. We'll finish up this year. There's some things we need to tweak, particularly around some of the updates that have gone on in terms of what's going on in the field. One of the big examples is throughout the plan we talk about the statewide system of support. We've now moved to a regional support framework, which is a little bit different. We think a lot better. And that we want to be sure and reflect that in the plan and update the department in Washington that this is something that we're moving on. There are a couple of other little technical tweaks that we need to do, which are editing kinds of things. And then we also want to take a look internally and then have this committee's input and bring back to you for input and approval any kind of continuous improvement or updates we might want to do to the plan that we've currently got out there.
Dr. Wells, thank you. Any questions? This will be an item for action on first read tomorrow. It may be that only Ms. Willoughby and Ms. McDevitt remember the Committee of Practitioners.
Thank you,
I think
Jay.
it's
What's
been
new?
about 18 months since
What's
the
old is
action.
new again.
Well, it's back.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think you just said we were old.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say
I said you're a potential member.
Very
said-
careful.
You can make that amendment tomorrow. I wouldn't do that to Ms. Willoughby. All right.
He's scared of me.
SLA 2 is also an action on first reading item. This is the revised standards for K-12 social studies. We're gonna have, okay. This is Is Beverly coming? Okay, good, I wasn't sure. I would remind you that we've done a couple of other items like this on revisions to our standards, where we have finished the exploration phase, and now what is being asked of us is to approve moving into the revision phase with the standards. So a lot of work is going on. This is not approving the standards, this is approving the process to get to those standards. So.
Absolutely.
Everyone,
Thank
please.
you very much. Good afternoon, Vice Chair Duncan, Mr. Buxton, Ms. Oxendine, State Board members and advisors. I am not Miss Christy Ebert. However, if you can cue this for me, I'll try and give you a little bit of an overview of first, why I'm here. Unfortunately, Ms. Ebert could not be with us today, and were it not for a family emergency, she would be here. And this is definitely her work. And if I look at that slide and it seems a little surprised, it's definitely her work. I am Beverly Vance. I'm Section Chief for Math, Science, and STEM. And ordinarily, the Section Chief for Social Studies would be here. However, we do not have one at this time. But we do have the members of the Social Studies team with me. They're in the back to answer questions, should I fail. They're in the back, if you can stand very quickly. So I am here with people who can answer technical questions should we have them. So I'll give you a very brief overview of where we are today with the K-12 Social Studies Standards Review process. We hope that you will be very impressed with what we have done since 2012 up till today, and grant us approval to move from our exploration phase into the revision process for the standards. We are following the process of implementation science, meaning that we are going to start with exploration in a more formal way, beginning with the summer of 2020. If we are approved at that time, go into installation 2021 and implementation with the aligned assessments 2021-22 school year. We are using the drivers of implementation science to make sure that we have efficient, effective, and sustainable implementation. But today I'm just going to give you a little bit of our research and evaluation efforts that we have done so far. Okay? And please feel free to ask any questions while I'm going through, because I know the social studies team is waiting to answer them. Okay? As we have moved forward from our time after implementing the standards in 2012, the social studies team has engaged various North Carolina stakeholders, which includes teachers, IHE members, lots of non-formal or informal educators. So they have a whole host of people that have given input on the current standards. And again, with our research and evaluation piece, they have engaged surveys that include focus groups with the hopes of continuous improvement since 2012 up till today. During the implementation of the 2012 standards, they've developed support documents. I know that the social studies team has engaged teacher leaders across the state every summer throughout the year on developing curriculum so that they really know the current standards. And that's important to know. If you know the current standards, you know how to move forward with revising those standards. So they have really done a lot to do that. As we are moving forward with this process, they are also looking at readiness, assessing where people are right now. You got to make sure that they know the current standards, but you have to go a little bit deeper to see if they are ready to revise those current standards. So they've done a little bit of surveying their current leaders, social studies leaders. They've engaged focus groups and looking at legislation and how that might impact where we need to go with the new standards. Okay. Beginning with May, they're going to do some analysis of data that's going to inform the recommendations that will guide the current review process. Okay. So in closing, today, hopefully we have provided just a little bit of an update of what has happened since 2012 up to today. We formally request the approval from the state board to move forward with the revision process for these standards. And with our next step, again, we anticipate if we begin this year, this month, that we will have approval in 2020, installation 2020-21, and installation is just when they are prepared, getting those resources ready for the new standards to be implemented during the 2021-22 school year. Okay. Any questions?
Dr. Vance, thank you. Let me see.
Thank you so much. And I know you're kind of standing in right now, so you may not be able to answer this question.
That's quite all right. I have my team, and I was not expecting you to ask that, but that's we thought we were going to be good. 6 slides, and I'm done.
So I'm party pooper, I guess. So as a former social studies teacher, I'm just really wanting as much detail as possible. So yeah, call the team up to see what is the process, the detailed process for how social studies teachers and leaders are actually being engaged. I only ask because from experience, a lot of times it has been done relatively piecemeal. I've had the good fortune of participating, but it was because I knew somebody was like, hey, you want to participate in this? It didn't feel very methodical. And to ensure, as Mr. McDevitt said, I'm huge on college career readiness. I also think civic readiness is a huge part of that. I want as many and as diverse perspectives to inform this standards process as possible. So any more information on how that's happening?
So I'll let him be a little more specific. However, remember we have just revised our standards revision process. So that process in itself is very detailed, and it's going to have some consistency, which it involves reviewing the current standards with stakeholders around the state, and we have a way of doing that by region. So that's going to make sure every region is heard, as well as coming down to establishing leader teams within each district, and then feeding into our external stakeholders and getting them involved as well. They can speak to the types of groups that they plan to involve, but we'll follow that process. That's going to make sure we get good coverage, but they may have some specific people that they're going to speak to.
Please.
So, hi, Tom Darty with Social Studies. We have really just started, all the data that we've collected so far has been really informally over the last several years since implementation of our current standards. And so really we just started sort of formal data collection last week. We had a Social Studies Leaders Institute in Summerfield where we invited leaders from across the state. We had teacher leaders as well as district leaders. And we had really specific data that we wanted to collect from them on like the scope and sequence of the current courses, and then drilling down into specific standards. We haven't as a team yet really discussed how we plan to capture which people we're going to try and tap within each specific district, but like Beverly said, there is a process for that.
If I could make a modest suggestion, as the process is developed, and I know it's still in the infant stages, if there could be some consideration for the regional composition, right, and then the proportion of students that are in North Carolina public schools. So right, so you have like 26% of black students, right? So perhaps a proportionate number, if possible, of the teachers, right, to bring that perspective, so that it's catered to the student population, right, and making sure that there's American Indian representation, and just, because social studies is a lot dependent on the ideology. We all know this, right, of who's teaching it. And so there may not be agreement per se, but putting as many different voices, perspectives in the room, and having some very intentional decision-making process around that would just really give me a lot of comfort.
And that is written in legislation as well already, that we are going to engage stakeholders who are representative of our people within our state, as well as at the federal level in our ESSA plan. It says who we're going to make sure that we have represented. And we do a public review, and so that's going to be a way of making sure that everyone has input in that.
Dr. Oxendine?
Thank you, Mr. Buxton, and thank you for this update on the process of revising social studies. My, at some point, I'd like to know, and you mentioned just a second ago about the scope and sequence. I'd like to know the topics of social studies from kindergarten through grade 12. It escaped me. K-12, in terms of what is taught in first grade and what is taught, what does social studies look like in the second grade? So, and that's just a request for the future.
Right, as a follow-up.
And by the way, there was an article I think it was in the Charlotte Observer. Someone brought it to my attention by way of a text message on the lack of Native American history
That's right.
being taught. I haven't read the complete article. Someone said I was quoted in there talking about the glaring achievement gap. And I'm happy about that. So it might be a good idea to grab that article and take a look at it in the process of thinking about changes in social studies.
Absolutely. That is part of the research and evaluation process, that not only are we looking at our current standards, we're looking at what other states do, we're looking at national and international trends, and that would be a part of the data that we would bring to the table. This group, this fine, wonderful group, would bring that type of information to the table and say, what does this mean for our current, moving forward? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Duncan.
There's a committee in the North Carolina Bar Association that's extraordinarily interested in participating in this process, and I couldn't quite tell how that fit into your stakeholder discussion or shareholder discussion. But I know there are, and that includes all the way to justices of our Supreme Court are involved with that and are very interested in being involved for civics education and for the courts. And so they're also aware of some resources that have been developed in Florida and in Washington, which have been, in fact, incorporated in those states and were helped to be developed through the court systems, various associations, national associations. So there's a great deal of important interest in this by people who can really contribute a lot to the process. And so I encourage you to take advantage of some folks who want to participate very affirmatively in this.
Maybe we can follow up with Mr. Duncan and
Absolutely.
find a way to engage that
Absolutely. That
constituency.
is a very good part of our process. We've engaged the chamber. The chamber makes connections, and I can speak to what we're doing in MAP currently. We've engaged with the chamber. They've connected us with business individuals who are focused on our content area, and the same thing will happen with social studies. Those individuals that, as you said, we bring them into the process, and as they go through, make focus group efforts to get their feedback, so that it's not just, they get to talk directly to our writers and to the consultants and give us that feedback. So that's an excellent suggestion.
And they're very interested in doing that, so that would be.
Thank you so much.
Mr. McKinney.
I was just wondering if there was any consideration about maybe training for the teachers that end up becoming the ones that are writing revising the standards, and like critical consciousness or culturally responsive pedagogy, so the training is there beforehand just to kind of make sure that that's a consideration. I didn't know if there was any consideration.
So, these are all procedural questions, so that's why I'm able to answer those. There is a part in our timeline where teachers who would be directly involved with the writing, or reviewers. There's a writing team, there's a closed review team, there's a data review, but they all will receive training on those issues that are important to that content area, as well as those issues that across the board are important. So there will be training. And if you have some specific ideas about what you want to include, let Tom know.
Gotcha, Tom.
Right. Any other questions or comments? I think we've got some follow-up on some specific training opportunities, some constituencies interested in getting involved, some information on Native American history, as well as some suggestions, and your question about the content and standards, kind of K through 12, but also some suggestions for engaging populations in a proportional way based on students. So I had thought we'd have about 6 minutes for this item. There was a lot more interest in it, and I'm
That's
very happy to see that.
Volunteers, 6 slides.
That's
6
right.
minutes.
Barry, you can see the deep board interest you have in this item, and so you should please tell Ms. Lynch-Ebert continue to engage us, and thanks to the social studies team for being here.
Thank you.
Again, board members, we will do action on first reading to approve the revision process to start. We have 2 action items that we'll vote on tomorrow. I'm going to flip the item, the order that we talk about them. SLA 4, last month we heard Dr. Locklear, the chair of the State Advisory Council on Indian Education, about the annual report, and Dr. Susan Silver was with us as well. I've asked Dr. Silver to be here in case there are any questions about the report. You'll remember the recommendations were kind of carried forward because of a lack of progress, but also a sense that there was more work to be done on those recommendations. So we will approve that report tomorrow, or vote on approving that report tomorrow. Are there any questions that folks have of Dr. Silver about the report? Seeing none, Dr. Silver, is there any additional information we should
No,
have?
I'm happy to entertain any questions. Other than that, on behalf of the council, they're asking that you receive the report.
Thank you, and we'll have that vote tomorrow. Dr. Silver, I appreciate you being here. Our last action item, SLA 3, which is the policy amendment on the elimination of grade 4 science and social studies, North Carolina final exams, and grade 5 social studies, North Carolina final exam. We have had this basically for discussion twice over the past few months. The presentation is in the board materials. I'd ask Dr. Howard to come forward and just make a brief comment to remind us about the purpose and rationale behind the recommendation of the elimination of these 2 exams. And then I'm going to ask for any questions. Again, we're going to vote on this tomorrow. So, Dr. Howard.
Thank you and good afternoon. So in the previous board materials, just to remind us, the why of this item is also stated in the executive summary as to reduce the number of tests the affected students are administered each year. And so we provided the number of students that participate in these assessments and also the number of teachers where that is their sole source for their EVOS rating. And you will recall those numbers were extremely low. And I do have those numbers if you'd like for me to cite them again. The other issue that I think has been discussed as well is the equity issue, that this is a small number of students, and these students are being administered an additional assessment that other students are not being administered. And so the why of this was really self-reflecting, I think, on our own part, as we encourage others to do as well, to just periodically say, these are the assessments we're administering, how much value do they have, and who are they impacting, both from a student perspective and from a teacher perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Let me open the floor. We're going to pull up the slide deck in case there are any of those slides you want to point to during questions. Let me open the floor for questions about this recommendation. Ms. Willoughby.
And this really isn't a question, but the last, well, not the last item, since you skipped one. I was all ready to say the last item, but the revision of social studies standards, that process, along with the SREB presentation today, which both focused on, how do we focus on improvement? And I recognize this is a small number of students. I couldn't remember exactly the number. Maybe you should say the number of students and teachers impacted here, just for our...
About 11,000 students.
Yeah, 11,000 students.
We want to page forward on this. I think
Grade 4 social studies is 5,035. And grade 5 social studies is 6,655. And grade 4 science, 11,497. Those are the student numbers.
Right. And so I recognize that and understand your rationale for this. But, as we do this, as we look at revising standards for social studies, as we think about, focusing on improvement, I hope that part of the conversation will not just be, oh, we got rid of tests, let's look at how are we improving, and I think Mr. McDevitt raised a good point. How are we improving social studies instruction? How are we improving science instruction? What are we doing to move the needle forward for our kids, rather than just looking at, oh, let's get rid of those, make sure those 11,000 students don't take this test. That's fine, I get it, I understand that. But what are we doing proactively to improve instruction? And I know that's not your area, but I just felt compelled to say that based on those last couple of presentations today.
Ms. Willoughby. Other questions about elimination?
Well, I want to echo what Ms. Willoughby is saying because it concerns me too. I need to know, we need to know as policymakers, it's all about students and it's all about the quality of instruction. And it isn't just social studies. I have questions about writing instruction and instruction about any of the content that's applicable to the grade level. So that's more than I want it to be more than a rhetorical question.
Well, I didn't mean it as a
No, I know
rhetorical
that.
question.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying
Yeah. Well, I think that's a bigger conversation, but it's about, moving us forward with our students and what do we need to do that. It's sort of like the issues around, we've talked about teacher retention. There's some big issues around that and how we attract quality people into the profession and what that means. And so those are bigger conversations that I'd love to see us spend some time on. Kind of the big picture and where we're going here as leaders in this venue.
Superintendent Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Willoughby and Dr. Oxendine. I think excellent point, heard loud and clear, and definitely want to state now, we started looking at this in September. I'm glad we're coming up to action on this for these 3 tests. We're also working on plans to bring to this board, since NC final exams are only in state board policy, to streamline all of the NC final exams, which would mean eliminating more on the high school level. So we have those plans. We'll be bringing those to you as well. And I think that's a very good point you make as we start talking about how we can streamline to have fewer, better tests that give us the information we need without the problem of over-testing that has really developed over the past decade.
Okay, so given that comment, I think it's important that I want to disentangle any future policy issues that might come up and make sure we're really clear on what this one's about. And so, just to reiterate, what I've heard is we have too few students taking this test. There's an equity issue about why they take it and others don't. We've got too few teachers taking it, covered from an EVOS perspective. It's not providing us a lot of diagnostic information to help us think about how to improve in science and social studies. We do have questions on the table that I heard from our 2 board members about understanding that this may not be providing us a lot of good diagnostic information about how we are doing and make improvements. How do we, in fact, improve instruction and assess what our students know and are able to do in science and social studies as they're coming up through? So I think as we move forward, this may be looking at Deanna, kind of issue session or planning discussion around thinking about the instructional improvement side versus the test reduction side. Yeah. So I just want to make that clear where we are in the discussion on the table. So in terms of this specific item, grade 4 science and social studies, grade 5 social studies, any other questions, comments? We will be voting on this tomorrow, and I would certainly ask our advisors to please chime in on this as you'd like. Okay, seeing a half hand, what we got? No? Okay. Seeing none, I'll remind you we will vote on that tomorrow. Okay, 2 consent items that you will also see tomorrow. One is SLA 5, which will be approval of the school calendar for the North Carolina residential schools for the deaf and blind. This essentially aligns those schools with the LEAs in the counties in which they reside and make sure they follow the requirement on calendar hours. And then SLA 6, which is the appointment of Ken Jones from Wilson, North Carolina to the Eastern North Carolina School for the Deaf Advisory Council. I would commend his bio in your board materials. Mr. Jones has been a professional leader and civic leader in Wilson for a number of years and with some experience with the School for the Deaf. With that, Mr. Vice Chairman, I rest my case.
Thanks, Mr. Buxton. We found 5 minutes never works, so we're going to take a 10-minute break, but it's going to be strictly enforced. We'll start at 2:35.
Spoken like a judge.
Well, it's no sense making it come close.
Like a man who's realistic.
Oh, that's already practiced.
Practice Committee and recognize Dr. Oxendine as chair of that committee.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the Educator Standards and Practice Committee. Joining me in that responsibility is Miss Amy White. She could not be with us today. So the first item, let me go through and lay out the agenda for this month. We have an issue session coming up in just a minute. We have a new business item, Educator Preparation Dashboard Update, that will be presented by Dr. Seiberg. We have an action on first reading, ES&P 1, and that's a closed session item. And then the next item is the State Board of Education LICN 001, which deals with out-of-state teachers' licensure, and we have two discussion items. So we will begin with the first item, which is an issue session, and we have Bertie County and Edgecombe County. We have Ms. Erin Swanson is going to be presenting for representing Edgecombe County, and Dr. Catherine Edmonds is going to be the presenter for Bertie County. And do we have anyone else who's going to be a part of that presentation today? If not, we will begin that presentation. Just to give you a little bit of context, this was a request at a previous state board meeting. We had a discussion about this particular item, and as a result of that discussion, I recommended that we actually hear what is going on in our school systems that are recipients of the grant. So as a result of that request, we are now going to hear from two school systems that have this, they're part of a pilot, a 3-year pilot, and we're going to hear the good things coming out of the grant.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Great to be here with you all. I'm Erin Swanson from Edgecombe County Public Schools. I'm the Director of Innovation there, and I'm just really looking forward to talking with you a little bit about our Opportunity Culture program in Edgecombe County. And I think my deck is being pulled up there. Wonderful. Oh, there we go. Wonderful. So we are really fortunate in Edgecombe County because as a advanced roles grant recipient, we've been able to partner with Public Impact. And this is now our 3rd year in partnership with Public Impact. And as part of that partnership, we are implementing Opportunity Culture in Edgecombe County. You'll see up here our vision in the district. So we have worked over the course of the past 2 years with our families, our students, our community to really arrive at this vision for our graduates. And what we've realized as we've discussed this is that we're all really inspired by this, but we know that in order to really make this happen, two things, more than two things, but certainly two things have to be true. One is that we need to really rethink what school looks like for our kids. Right now, all of our scholars are not prepared to realize this vision, and so we believe that that's on us to really redesign our school environments to ensure that that is possible for our kids. And we also know that in order to do that, we need great talent at all levels in our school system. And so that brings us to some of the work around opportunity culture and advanced roles. And so our district faces a number of the same challenges that many districts across the state and the nation face. I know you all are very familiar with these, so I won't dwell on this, but most of our schools are structured fairly traditionally, where you can see in this graphic, there's a principal, there's 16 teachers, 18, 20, 40, however many teachers. But the best teachers there in the blue, they teach about the same number of students as your average teachers or your subpar teachers who are there in the white circles. That's a problem. Those teachers have no greater reach than others. We're losing teachers to district jobs and other careers. That's especially true in a place like Edgecombe County, which is rural North Carolina, as you all know. Teachers are working alone, they're working in silos, and principals are feeling overwhelmed. And so when we first heard from Brian and Emily Hassel about opportunity culture and about the benefits that it could provide to our district, we were really excited about that. Really excited about the opportunity to apply for the Advanced Roles Grant, and it all came at the right time. And so we are already seeing the fruits of this work. Again, as I mentioned, we started designing for Opportunity Culture 3 years ago. We're now in our 2nd year of implementation. So our Innovation Zone schools, as we call them, 3 schools in our North Edgecombe High School feeder pattern, started implementing last year in the 17-18 school year. Our Tarboro feeder pattern schools started implementing this school year. and our south and west side feeder pattern schools will start implementing next school year. We're already seeing some of the things you'll see on this slide in action. So students are starting to gain access to excellent teaching as a result of the impact of our multi-classroom leaders. Teachers are advancing in their profession. We now have a career ladder in Edgecombe County that we never had before. Our teachers, especially our new teachers and our teachers who may be struggling a bit, are getting support that they were not getting prior to this implementation. And then we're really seeing our principals' excitement around this work because their job's changing. You know, they're now no longer trying to manage, 16 or 20 people with varying needs. They are now coaching coaches, which is a different role for them and something that we're working to support them in. But ultimately, we believe that type of distributed leadership has a lot of potential. So you can see here, I know you all are likely familiar with opportunity culture. These are the 5 opportunity culture principles, and we in Edgecombe adhere to these principles. This is what lays the foundation for our work across all 13 schools that will be implementing opportunity culture next year. So the piece I know a lot of folks have questions about is how are you funding this within regular budgets, and so we can talk a little bit about that, but that's something that we're continuing to work toward. So this is the current landscape in Edgecombe County. So you can see we have really employed 3 roles, and again these roles are roles that Public Impact has created, but that we've really taken and modified to meet the needs of our schools and our district. And so we've got three specific roles: multi-classroom leaders, expanded impact teachers, and reach associates. You can read the descriptions there. Essentially, that multi-classroom leader is your instructional coach, but that coach does a lot more than a typical instructional coach. That's your person who does whatever it takes to growing kids. They're accountable for the growth of all of the students on their team, and typically they only work with between 1 and 4 teachers. So instead of your instructional coach, they're actually working with a much more concentrated group of teachers in a specific grade level or content area. So they have the time and the capacity now to really go deep with those teachers and really support them. You can see right now in Edgecombe we have 11 multi-classroom leaders. We've got 1 K-5 MTSS multi-classroom leader, which is kind of a unique role. We can talk more about that if you're interested. We've got quite a few working in K-5 ELA and math. Those are areas of need for us in many of our schools, and so it's been awesome to have these excellent teachers support teams in ELA and math. 6-8 math and science, and then 9-12 math and science is another area of need for us. We also have expanded impact teachers in our district. Those are those amazing teachers who, the principal gets a call every year from, 100 parents saying, I want that, my kid in that teacher's class. That's your expanded impact teacher, right? That's the teacher who is just phenomenal with kids. You want to get as many kids in front of them as you can. And so right now we have 4 expanded impact teachers in Edgecombe County, 3 in math and science, and then 1 at our School of Innovation who has a somewhat unique role that I'll talk about here in a minute. And then finally, we do extend our advanced roles to our classified staff as well. So we have reach associate positions in our district. It's a higher level paraprofessional or teacher assistant type of position. We found that this is an absolutely critical role to making this work. So these reach associates are on the teams with multi-classroom leaders or expanded impact teachers, and they support these teachers in the classrooms. They support these teams. They pull small groups of students. They may push into a classroom to really ensure that students are receiving the high quality instruction that they deserve. So those reach associates are a critical piece of this. Just 2 quick models I'll put up. Coker-Wimberley Elementary School is one of our small elementary schools, about 250 students. It's a Title I elementary school in a very rural part of Edgecombe County. Right now, they have 3 teachers in MCL roles, 3 MCL2s. You can see that 2 of them are in lower elementary and 1 in upper elementary. This school actually has a pretty deep reach in terms of multi-classroom leaders and teachers in advanced roles. So the majority of kids, actually all kids at Coker-Wimberley right now, are being reached in one way or another by a multi-classroom leader, which is phenomenal. So we know all kids are being reached by a teacher who has shown significant growth with students in the past. And we're really seeing the impact of that. This school, 2 years ago, did not meet growth. Last year, its first year of implementation, it met growth and was like just points from exceeding growth. So they were very, very close. And certainly there's a number of factors that play into that, but we really do believe that this is a critical element of that success. So we're starting to see student growth. We're starting to see a lot more higher teacher satisfaction, higher teacher retention at Coker-Wimberley Elementary, which is really, really awesome to see. North Edgecombe High School, also in the same feeder pattern. This is another of our innovation zone schools. North Edgecombe is, again, a small high school that's doing some phenomenally innovative things. North Edgecombe, again, was one of the first schools that implemented opportunity culture in Edgecombe. Right now, there are three lead teachers in opportunity culture roles in MCL2 and 912 math. An EIT, so we have an expanded impact teacher teaching biology. So the two tested STEM subjects there are really critical areas. And then we have an expanded impact teacher in our School of Innovation. So she takes on some math instruction, and then she does a lot of work around social emotional learning as well. North Edgecombe exceeded growth for the second time in 2 years and has grown to be a C school. So still a lot of work to do, but we're really seeing some promising results there. So just a quick overview of successes and challenges. So I mentioned student growth already. We're really excited about that. As you all, I'm sure, are familiar, Edgecombe County has struggled for years with retaining teachers, with filling vacancies. We're starting to see the needle move on that, which is really exciting. So our teacher retention, particularly in this innovation zone area, has increased. We do have fewer vacancies at the beginning of the school year, which is very exciting. These schools that I was just speaking about, it was not unusual at the beginning of the year to potentially have 3 or 4 vacancies, and for 50% of those to go unfilled throughout the school year. That's not the case this year, which is great for kids. I mentioned principal satisfaction already, and then as the Director of Innovation, I think one of the things I'm most excited about, and I know our principals are too, is that we're really seeing this work transform school culture. So this is certainly an innovative approach to staffing and to scheduling, and folks are seeing like, yeah, we can do something that's a little bit different, and everything's not going to crash down around us. Like, this is possible, and we can actually do school differently, and so that's giving them a little bit more encouragement and a little more confidence to do some other things differently in their classrooms too. So we're seeing this as and within their schools, so a real catalyst for innovation, which is very exciting. On the challenges side, recruitment is and has continued to be a challenge. We want to continue deepening our pool of candidates for these roles. So that's something that we're working on in conjunction with Public Impact and a number of our partners. Funding for our 9 Title I schools, trying to figure out how to fund the salary differentials for these roles. It's easier in Restart schools, it's easier in Title I schools, it's a little harder in a non-Title I school. And then applying opportunity culture to those non-core content areas like EC and CTE. Right now we don't have the flexibility to do that in the way that I think would be ideal. We're figuring out some ways to make it work. I mentioned an MTSS MCL, which that teacher supports special education and general education teachers and is paid from an O1 allotment. So we figured out some ways to do it, but that's something we need to continue innovating around. Funding sources and trade-offs. Our funding sources, we talked a little bit about trading in our O1 allotments. That's something that we've done. Again, we've worked with Public Impact to figure out a model that's really going to work for us. But we've been able to trade in some O1 allotments to create these multi-classroom leader and expanded impact teacher roles. Schools that are Title I are using Title I allocation primarily for salary differentials. But they're also in some cases using that Title I money to pay for an entire position if they have those kind of resources. And then we are not paying any of our salaries or salary differentials with our advanced role grant money. We want this to be sustainable beyond the grant. And so our consulting fees with Public Impact are supported through the grant, but our differentials are not, or our salaries are not. And then we are making some trade-offs, right, to make this work. Slightly larger class sizes in some cases, less teacher assistant support. And some content areas are not receiving intensive support during the build out of this. It might be a high school, and you saw North Edgecombe up there, where they've got some more intensive support in math and science, but not in ELA right now. We're trying to figure out how to afford that, right? We'd love to have that support in the humanities as well, but we're not there yet with our financial model to do that. So we're getting there and we're working on that. But we think the trade-offs are worth it with what we've seen so far. And then you can see here, we're going to be one of the first all OC districts in the country, which is really exciting. By next year, we'll have 13 of our 14 schools, all of our traditional schools will be implementing. And then we've just been talking about, what would it take to get us to 100% reach with opportunity culture, with advanced roles in our district, and some of these things I've touched on already. I think we can get there, and we're going to keep innovating to be sure that we can get there. But for us, thinking about how do we use our funding as flexibly as we can. That's something that we're thinking a lot about. I think discretionary funding for salary differentials, particularly for our non-Title I schools, would be very helpful, particularly in a low wealth district where we don't have local dollars to spend on this initiative. The class size waivers have been very, very helpful to us, so we are grateful for that. And then, this initiative isn't one of those things where, you hire these teachers and they're there forever, right? Like this, we hope that they'll be there forever, but this is something that's going to continue to grow. People are going to transition in and out, and so we are going to need to continue developing them professionally. I mean, one thing we have definitely learned is that our multi-classroom leaders in particular, they're amazing. They've had great results in the past, but they're also moving into a role that's pretty significantly different from what they've done before. And so in order for them to be successful, we need to develop them. How do you lead a team to really look at data and to use it effectively? How do you develop culture in a team of adults? Those types of things. And so we've had the good fortune of some grant dollars to partner with new leaders. And our multi-classroom leaders are benefiting from the Emerging Leaders Program, which is phenomenal and also expensive. And so we've been thinking about, how do we continue that partnership beyond the life of that grant and this grant. And so, and we believe that if we don't, then, we're not going to see the continued success of this program. So those are some of the questions we have. Those are some of the things we're thinking about. I hope that answers your question.
Oh my goodness,
and,
more than I imagined. Your enthusiasm is infectious.
Yeah, we're really excited about it, and we're very much looking forward to continuing this work. So thank you all for your support.
Absolutely.
My contact information
question, Ms. Willoughby?
Well, I just want to say thank you. This is another exciting presentation from Edgecombe County, and y'all will remember a few years ago, Erin was here because we had Martin Millennial School here talking about their use of, I think you were using then, it was called VIF, it's not called that anymore.
Yep.
Participate teachers, and really focusing on the world cultures in a very successful way. But this is a wonderful example of career development for teachers that we've talked about for as long as I've been in this business, but you're actually doing it. And so maybe one source of funding is that you go out and sell your expertise to other districts, because you clearly could do that, Erin. But I really applaud Edgecombe County. I mean, there's no excuse for anywhere if you're able to do this in what I know to be a part of the state that's really struggling, but you have got tremendous community support down there for the schools because of the leadership of people like you.
Well, thank you.
It's a perfect example of innovation. Absolutely. Other questions? Yes. Ms. Godwin.
Hi, how are
Hi,
you?
Ms. Godwin.
Question, I saw where recruitment was one of the things that was, considered a struggle at this point. And I was wondering, we have a lot of great teachers that would probably love to do an advanced role, but life circumstances prevent them from being able to take on extra. Have you seen any type of resentment or any type of ill will amongst teachers for the pay differential, because that is such a big deal, and a collaborative community is so important. So I didn't know if that was something that you have seen, and if it was an issue, and how you're addressing that.
No, I think that's very real, and that's definitely a question that we've gotten from all of our schools, primarily during the design phase, right? Because they're talking about this, they're thinking about it, they're trying to figure out what this would look like at their school, because that's really an important element of this work, and part of what sold us is that it's very site-based. So the principal selects a team from their school to make decisions about how this is going to look at their school, which we think is a really critical element. But then, yes, so folks on that team, I think, have a better understanding of what this is going to look like. folks who aren't on that team, depending on how well it's communicated, do start worrying a little bit in some cases. I'm a 20-year veteran. Am I all of a sudden going to have somebody in my room watching every move I make? And I think what we've seen is once this is actually rolled out in a school, that those fears dissipate, because they see that we're really thoughtful about the hires we make, and it's all about the person, right? So if that MCL comes in and is very demanding and is very overbearing, then that perception persists. But if that person is really good at building culture within the team, at supporting as opposed to demanding, we're seeing that teachers have fewer concerns and are actually really excited about it. One example is Coker-Wimberley 2 years, when we first started implementing, they did not have multi-classroom leaders across all grade levels and content areas. And teachers were actually upset about that. They said, why does this team get a coach but we don't? And so we've adjusted our model, readjusted it last year so that everybody would have a coach. So we're really seeing that once it's in place, people get excited about it. And I wouldn't say that's 100% of the case. I don't want to overstate, right. But for the most part, yeah, I think we're seeing positive perception there.
Thank you, Ms. Godwin, for that question. Other questions, Mr. Buxton?
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. I can't help but think that my wife's grandmother, Vi Babcock, who did 30 years teaching English at Tarboro High School, would be pretty amazed by advanced teaching roles in Edgecombe County. I want to get real tactical on the flexibility and understand in today's scenario what you and other districts would need to put in models that you think best fit your situation. Opportunity culture, probably not for everybody, but for a lot of folks who are interested in this, I assume you need flexibility in the teacher, teacher assistant, and maybe textbook allotments.
Yep, that's helpful. Yep.
If you had that, besides the consulting support, that's another question. Can you do what you need to do?
I think so.
So that level.
So. I think the additional funding from Title I, and because we do have pretty solid flexibility to use that funding as we need it, I think that's very helpful as well. So yes, I would say yes, and those additional Title I dollars are incredibly helpful too.
And then follow up, Dr. Oxendine, just spitballing here a little bit with you. If there were an allotment, if you're thinking about new money,
right,
where if districts wanted to do advanced roles and they had some percentage of their FTEs that they could position towards 2% of your roles is X number of positions that you could then position towards specific advanced teaching roles. You couldn't just do anything with it maybe, but if you wanted to do MCLs something like this, that would give you some flexibility as well.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Wallace.
Just a quick question.
Yes, sir.
I noticed in your slides you had one of the trade-offs of your funding sources, kind of piggybacking off Mr. Buxton, you're trading in your O1 allotments, and that trade-off is slightly larger class sizes.
Yes, sir.
And then you had also continued class size waivers. Yeah. On the next slide you have that. And pretty much the new money to offset that. I'm just, as a principal, I'm looking, we never want class sizes to get bigger. Reach one, teach one.
Right.
So I was just wondering, was there any options? Have y'all studied that a lot so you wouldn't have to do that? Because that's the fad going now, turning in positions to do things like that.
Right, yes. So we're really thoughtful when we do that. So again, I'm going to go back to the Coker-Wimberley example since we are in the second year of implementation there. I think that's probably where we have the most data so far. So the first year, we probably went too hard on the raising of the class sizes and didn't offset that with enough support from our MCLs. Okay. We have had to readjust, and really for us, it's been more of a scheduling question because we've kept to the same number of we've actually added an MCL this year, but I think we've been more strategic about scheduling their time and the time of the Reach Associates, so that if we have increased the class size, and we are up in the lower elementary grades there, we will schedule up to 25, 26 kids in a class. but we'll ensure that for the majority of the day, and especially during that core content time, yes, exactly, that there's a reach associate or an MCL in that classroom. So yes, we've been able to manage that, but it does take some strategic scheduling. And I think, you know, one thing I didn't say here, but I just do want to reiterate is that you know, leadership is critical. Like, this is working best in schools with amazing principals, really strong leadership teams, you know, really strong MCLs, you know, so I think that, you know, that piece is really, yeah, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but that piece is obviously really, really important.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Ms. Swanson, and I will just say back to the staff, the teachers, the principals, the superintendent, and others that we appreciate the hard work you're doing. Absolutely. We're proud of the work that you're doing with this pilot, and it just has all the bells and whistles of creative thinking and creative leadership.
Yeah, well, thank you so
very
much. Thank you all for your support.
Definitely. Come again.
Will do. We'd love to.
We have one other presentation. Dr. Edmonds is coming forward. I had the opportunity of working with Dr. Edmonds a couple of years ago. She was the executive director of the North Carolina Principal Fellows Program, and I serve on that commission as a result of my work on the state board. So it's good to see you again.
It's great
Welcome.
to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, and board members. It is indeed a pleasure to be here with you to share the advanced teaching roles for Bertie County. And I want to set an expectation that we recently received the grant. So it was great to hear Aaron talk about Edgecombe and where they are, and they're in their second year of implementation and where they're going. My presentation to you will be more aspirational. This is what we were thinking about as we sat around the table and said, what are the needs for Bertie County schools? What do we need to have happen in this school district to ensure that every student in our school district will have that opportunity to that sound basic education that we talk about all the time? And so in that, we came up with Bertie Thrive. And before we started with the work with advanced teaching roles, I knew that there were grants out there. So we started on some of that work, working with schools that lead with improvement science. And in that process, we started thinking, okay, we want to get better at getting better. And so as we started thinking about that, we were like, okay, how do we do this work in such a way that is systematic and it's not piecemeal, and that we have all these different things being thrown at folks? And so when I first went into Bertie County, I started with my listening tours. And I started this listening tours with the community, with the businesses, elected officials. The best one was the one with students. They told me exactly what they needed and what they wanted. And they said, you know what? No one has ever asked us this. And to hear the students talk about the type of education they felt they deserved, and how when they left Bertie County, the competency that they wanted to take with them, I was like, okay, we are on to something. And then to talk to teachers and hear from our teachers about the environment and the culture that they want to work in, how they want to have a voice, how they want to see the schools getting better and better, and have a way that our students are contributing back to the community. We have before you Bertie Thrives. And we have several partners that are working with us with Bertie Thrives, and we do have RTI International, and I would like to recognize Marcia. She's here with us, if she can wave. And I'll share with you what each role our partners play in the grant. Let's see if I can get this going. So why Bertie Thrives for Bertie County? We know in Bertie County that 17% of our teachers have left Bertie County. That's nearly double the overall state attrition rate. We're one of the highest in the state. And we know that from research that nearly 47% of teachers have expressed that they did not have a voice in decision making. And so as I'm sharing with you our model, it's going to look a little bit different. And remember, I said it's aspirational. So as we go along, and I'll share with you some changes that we've already made. And another piece is that Bertie County Schools does not offer a local supplement. And I think at one point we were one out of maybe two or three districts, and now I think we may be the only one. And we're surrounded by districts like Pitt and Edgecombe that both offer more than $2,100. So how do we get teachers that will come into Bertie County, feel like they want to stay in Bertie County so that we can retain our teachers? And this is our theory of action. We believe that if teachers have an opportunity to grow professionally and advance in their career by championing teacher voice, leading culture, coaching other teachers, and fostering continuous improvement, then in the district system sustainably support meaningful incentives, provide differentiated pathways, and clearly link supplements to student and teacher performance, then we will improve teacher recruitment and development and retention and increase the number of highly effective instructional leaders so that every student has equitable access to an excellent teacher. So this is our theory of action for Bertie Thrives. And these are the 4 areas that we're looking at. So cultivating a thriving teacher corps. So we not only want to recruit and retain teachers, but how do we partner with the institutes of higher ed that are in our area so that we can build a pipeline of teachers that will want to stay in Bertie County. Create thriving pathways for teachers, build a thriving teacher culture, and foster thriving learning communities while extending the reach of the effective teachers. And you heard Aaron talk about having your most effective teachers leading a group of teachers so that we extend the reach of that teacher onto other students more than just that 30 or so that he or she would have had in their classroom. And this is our planning overview, our 4-phase process. And I know it's small and you can barely see it, but we have already started the work. And in that work, as we're looking at our design team, and we've been intentional about starting our design team with the partners that are going to be around the table and providing support so that we are all speaking the same language. So before we bring in our teachers and our principals, we want to ensure that those of us that are outside agencies that are providing support for us, that we're all speaking the same language. And so then you can see where we're going to have our launch, our implementation, and then how we're going to scale this up. And a lot of this work that you see in front of you, that is going to be done by the design team. These were our initial thoughts, our initial thinking about how this could look. But as we start designing this with the teachers and the staff within the district, we are sure that this will probably look a lot different when we come back before you again. So this was our initial thinking about, so what would be the roles that we would have in our schools? And we had champion teacher voice. That would be an area that we would want our teachers to have a clear understanding and be able to do lead culture, coach teachers, and foster continuous improvement. When we had our first design team meeting amongst our partners, it was brought to our attention that this sounds like a lot of the things that we've done in the past, and what folks get confused about, you know, what it is that we're asking them to do. Are we saying when we say coach teachers, are we talking, so we have teacher guide and teacher mentor. They're like, are these the teacher instructional coaches, or are these the mentors that we had in the past? So what do we mean by teacher guide or teacher mentor, and how do we map what we're doing to the partners that are providing support so that we can at the end evaluate the impact? And so I don't have this slide because this work happened the day that I turned in the presentation, when we went from the 4 things that you see there to 1 being amplifying teacher voice, then leading a culture of continuous improvement, and building instructional capacity. And when you look at who our partners are, and they're on the next slide, each of our partners are mapped to one of these areas that we say we want our teacher leaders or our teacher guides and teacher mentors to have in the roles of advanced teaching roles. So, who are our partners? And what part do they play in the bigger picture? So, when we look at amplifying teacher voice, we're working with Hope Street Group. And Hope Street Group has done work across 6 states, and 1 includes Hawaii, and they've done work in North Carolina as well with the Governor's Teacher Network. And they have their competencies that they look at to how do we help teachers really have a voice at the local level and at the state level in impact policy. Because we want our teachers who are in the advanced teaching roles to be able to share out what it is that we're doing in a local context and what policy changes or how's policy supporting that or not supporting that. And we want them to be able to know how do you advocate that. And we're working with Schools That Lead, and that's the piece around the improvement science, which is how do you get better at getting better? And it's different than having the instructional folks go in and teach the objectives. It is a way of thinking. And we have RTI International. And this is a piece that we're excited about, but it also speaks to one of our struggles, is that our central office, our central services is so small, and we have so many people doing so many jobs that we had to write into our grant an outside organization that could manage the grant, ensure that we're meeting the expected objectives and outcomes, to ensure that we're staying on pace with our implementations in the different phases, and to ensure that at the end we're doing an evaluation and that we're working in such a way that we can evaluate what was having impact. So RTI serves two roles for us. One, they are the folks that manage our grant for us. So we have a project management spreadsheet. They're the ones that pull us all together, ensure that any outcomes or to-do lists that come out of that we are addressing those. And they also provide support around the critical friends group piece. How do we work together as professionals to provide support? And another partner that we have in this grant is Elizabeth City State University and the National Center for Teacher Residencies. And this is the piece where we want to work with the higher ed institution in our area to help build a pipeline of effective teachers. So we say we want advanced teaching roles, and my question became, well, if we look at our current population of teachers, how many teachers would we have that would be ready to go and serve in this role? And so what we want to do is start developing teachers and working with Elizabeth City so that we have that pipeline and that we have a true residency program. And we'll have mentors that will work with the residents when they come into the district. And we're looking at funding from other partners to actually fund that piece of the grant. So that's not a piece that's funded in the advanced teaching roles. And then another piece, a partner that we have is Spoke Hub, and that piece is around communications, and not just communicating the actual grant itself, but how do we connect teachers in a very different way other than having to sit face to face with each other. So when you look at all of our different partners, we can map each of them to a very specific expected outcome of our grant. In that way, we'll be able to evaluate what its impact is. And as I shared before, these are our 4 areas that we are looking at for our advanced teaching roles. And around all of this is building relationships. Okay. And I'm sorry, and I shared with you before that we have our design teams that are at work, and this is our model that we look at. What will it take for our design teams to ensure that we have a successful implementation? And we know everything is not going to go perfectly, so what do we do when we hit a barrier? How do we get the group back together and think about, so how do we look at this differently? And remember I said this is aspirational. Now that I've seen Aaron's presentation and some of the things that they're actually doing, I have some questions for them. And I really appreciate the statewide convening that we had, where those of us that are just getting started, we were able to talk with those who've been in the work for a couple years. And so when we look at Bertie Thrives across Bertie County, what is it that each area in our district has to do to ensure that this gets going? And so when we look at our design teams, we have to address all of these areas that you see before you on this slide. And our communications plan, because we know that if we do not effectively communicate what it is that we're trying to do, we've already learned that from one of our design meetings when people thought that our teacher mentors were going to be instructional coaches that we had in the past, that we have to have an effective communications plan. So we're looking at that face-to-face communication, as well as looking at how do we use social media and web content to communicate this in multimedia profiles of teacher guides and mentors to ensure that folks really understand what it is that we're doing in Bertie. And questions, I will take questions at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Edmondson. To my colleagues, do we have any questions from board members? My one question is, I heard you say just a few minutes ago that you're using, because of the small size of your central office, your leadership team, support team, that you're using a portion of the grant to pay an outside, one of your partners. Is it about what percentage of the grant would you say is being used for that purpose?
Yeah, so our first year is 175, I think it is, and we're using about 40,000, but that includes their other pieces of the work that they're doing as well.
And I think I heard you say they're going to perform the evaluation of the grant.
Yes.
Very good. Again, thank you very much, and we look forward. This was aspirational. We look forward to you returning and giving us an update. It sounds very exciting. I love the acronym, THRIVE.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item, board members, is a new business item, and this is the Educator Preparation Dashboard, and this is a result of Senate Bill 599. 599 has some very specific language in it around the State Board of Education taking the responsibility of developing a dashboard, and that dashboard will be a public will be a site for the public to go to and gather information and learn more about the work of our EPPs, our colleges and universities, schools of education, graduate and undergraduate level. So the EPPs those institutions do report to the State Board on an annual basis. 599 says that the State Board of Education shall move forward with the development of a dashboard, and this is our first update on the status of the creation, the development of the dashboard, and Dr. Seiberg is going to do the presentation.
Good afternoon, board members. I'm just going to give you a couple minutes on this this human capital dashboard. And really, the way I kind of want to frame this is that there's this obligation in law to build these an interactive dashboard, and then there's this aspiring goal to try and expand what is currently laid out in law for educator preparation programs into a broader human capital dashboard. So first, let's take a look at what is actually required in law, and this was in House Bill 986. Essentially, the law requires the development of essentially an interactive dashboard of EPP data. So many of you have seen me come year over year to present with you a series of static documents. And those static documents are really valuable in a certain very specific lens, but it's also hard to sort of navigate all those different static documents to find those various comparisons that may be really unique to your interests and your comparisons. So, so part of this law was to say, let's try and bring all this data together in a way that can be, that we can cut the deck in a variety of ways and look at data in more useful and more efficient ways. The other thing to know about this is that this is still leveraging, they refer to them as report cards, and they are still leveraging the data that we collect in the performance reports, which are quite lengthy documents about the various requirements and obligations that educator preparation programs have to meet. So basically, you can think of a very lengthy report being smushed into a series of little dashboards and graphics and easily consumable data that you can cut in a variety of ways. So that's what's expected in law. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the timeline in a second, but I do want to share with you a little bit about, as we started thinking about this requirement, if we think about educator preparation programs, they're a very small slice of the continuum that is human capital across education in general. And so you could think of this educator preparation program dashboard as sort of one module of a multi-module setup that would allow various stakeholders, whether you be a parent or a candidate or a legislator or a reporter, to teachers, LEAs, school districts, a variety of stakeholders, that these stakeholders, if they had a place where we could warehouse and provide easily consumable data longitudinal data that you could see changes over time, that you could compare one set of data to another set of data in meaningful and efficient ways. This could really be useful not just for educator preparation programs, but for a lot of stakeholders. And so this idea was, this germ of an idea has sort of taken root now, and we have this obligation to try and to meet the spirit of the law, but also to think about other ways that we might be able to capitalize this and make this an even more useful tool for the broader academic community. So this slide here, the question, I think, if you had to ask yourself, who is this dashboard for, and how is it going to impact the various stakeholders out in the field? If you look at the top half of this outline here, you'll see the public access. This is the position that the law is expecting to be in place, and it's the idea that teacher candidates have a clear understanding of the various programs that they have access to, that they can enroll in, that lawmakers have a clear understanding of the accountability and the policy impacts and decision-making that's going on from their perspective, that the general public can get program availability in the various components that programs have, and that the Board of Education here can think using these public data to support strategic planning and sort of think ahead across the horizon. So that's sort of the public side of things. But then there's this idea, again, back to this notion of the broader human capital dashboard. We could also, if we thought carefully about this, if we created a series of stakeholder user interfaces in this, we could expand this to provide LEAs with important data so that they can think about where they're recruiting educators from what EPPs, and how those EPP hires they've had over the various years have done in terms of their student achievement and a variety of outcome measures. We can look at, the EPPs can look at important data points that may be smaller than what we could make generalizable statements about, but we could look, the small programs really could use this data in meaningful ways to drive their own school improvement planning. And then also that the Department of Public Instruction in general can use that for targeting supports, leverage best practice to help institutions that might be struggling in particular areas, as well as reporting and accountability. So this is sort of a variety of places where this can have some important impact. In terms of the timeline, I want to share sort of two parallel things that are happening simultaneously. One is the system development. So we have to first create the plumbing behind the scenes to allow this to work. We've been working on that since late January, early February, to get our various data components to come in under the SEDS compliance, which is sort of a mandated standard across the department now. In March, we'll move to develop templates and how-to guides to support the educator preparation programs, to teach them how to input the data in a way that is, again, SEDS compliant. And then we'll start collecting data, as we always do, beginning around April, May. We'll start collecting educator preparation program data for this previous year. It's always a year in arrears. And then our anticipation is to work with SAS to develop dashboards and functionality in terms of the visual representation of that data in meaningful ways, as the law is expecting. November of this year, we are slated to make an update to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee, and that's sort of to share with them where are we at with an accountability model, sanctions model, the online dashboarding, and all that kind of stuff. And then the expectation currently in law is that we have a system up and running in mid-December of this year. There are some moving components behind the scenes that some of these target dates may be a little squishy. They may give us a little bit more time depending on what gets passed in the coming weeks, but this is where we're at currently. Now that's one side of the equation that's going on. The second side is under the policy development. Since December of the previous year, 2018, we have worked with Pepsi, the Professional Standards Commission, to look in terms of two subcommittees looking at one side of activity, which is the accountability model, and a second subgroup that's looking at sanctions. And those two groups have come up with some materials that they're going to be presenting to the broader commission in, I guess, next week, next Thursday, with the idea that they can narrow down some decision making and hopefully bring some ideas and some recommendations to this board in May or June. So again, with the laws that were passed last year, there were some specific expectations of what should be in the accountability measure, but they left it up to the board to think about how those measures should be weighted. So how much weight should go into one measure versus another, and that's what Pepsi's working on currently. And then, so as they are achieving that, then that drives the sanctions side of things, right? So if we said that one of the measures, if the commission decides that a prominent feature of the accountability model should be this particular factor, then the sanctions should necessarily be aligned to helping support folks and institutions, EPPs, that may be having challenges in those areas. So the sanctions and the accountability are sort of working hand in hand. There's members of the commission that are actually moving between those two subcommittees to make sure that there's good communication between those two. So that's a little bit about the key dates. I put this together, I think it's the back page of one of the handouts that we supplied the board. This is just sort of a walkthrough as to how we get from, the start of collecting data from out in the field and converting it ultimately to dashboards. And this basically is the process we'll be dealing with. When I mentioned earlier the idea of working on the plumbing behind the scenes, this is sort of a layout of how that process will be undertaken over the past, since the 2 months ago, and then for the next 8 months or so after today. Lastly, there's some question about the funding of the project. To build what is required, the easiest way that we can move forward is to leverage an existing dashboard that SAS had worked with the North Carolina public school systems and convert that into a system that would be operational for all schools, not just the public schools. And the estimate back from SAS was to do that conversion and to get the dashboarding up and running. The estimate is around $270,000. And it's a ballpark estimate of 18 to 20% annual maintenance cost from that point forward. And then in terms of what would be ideal, if we were trying to expand this to a human capital dashboard, there are some foundations that are interested in networking with us and are considering ideas to leverage resources towards that end, with the idea of then sharing that potentially with other states, so that other states can use what we're doing on the innovative side to broaden the understanding of the human capital dashboard and stakeholders across the country. So with that, just generally on my last slide here, again, the initial effort is to develop what is first required in that law between now and the end of this year, and then ultimately to expand that system to include more functionality and more movement towards the human capital dashboard. So we're trying to be strategic in what we're designing so that additional components can be attached in the front and behind that module, so that we can get more usefulness out of it for a variety of stakeholders.
Thank you very much. Questions from my colleagues? Ms. Willoughby.
Was there any funding? I know this is part of the bigger work of the UNCGA Teacher Quality Dashboard, so is there funding attached to create this?
In the law that was passed, there were no dollars appropriated for the design and creation of this system, and that's one of the reasons that we're trying to leverage the existing system, because it's the most cost-effective way for us to go. That said, it has also been a part of a variety of stakeholder input. I think it was a part of the governor's funding request. I think it was a part of the state superintendent's request, and there might have been another one in there too. So there's a variety of, again, moving pieces to try and drum up support from the legislature in this.
So currently, we are requesting funds to develop this dashboard. Is that what you're?
Well, we would develop.
Yes, other questions?
Good.
Ms. Willoughby?
A
Mr.
follow-up to
Buxton?
that. Just,
Yes.
and I'm gonna play my new guy card at least one
Okay,
more time.
play your new guy card.
So this is what I'm trying to figure out. That's the UNC Educator Quality Dashboard.
That is a piece of it, yes.
Right.
Would you show that?
No, I just looked at it, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And so I'm trying to understand what's different that's in our
Yes.
performance reports or that's
Yes.
required by law, besides the fact that that's sitting on UNC's server or whatever. What's different in here that we couldn't build on that and maybe
Well,
take that?
yeah, that's a good point. So we are anticipating building on that very platform, and what's different is that the questions and the data and the things that were collected for that system may not be necessarily what is obligated in law. So there are, in 599, they laid out a page and a half of very specific requirements that need to be a part of the reporting component. They may or may not be a part of that North Carolina dashboard. And initially, my understanding is that initially this was, in the first iterations of 599, the idea was that North Carolina would take on the dashboarding component for all institutions. But obviously, you could imagine there's some challenges to the private institutions handing over all their data to a public system, that they felt it was more appropriate for the Department of Public Instruction to house all data which we're collecting anyway in a public setting that was more neutral ground. And so, so I think what you're getting at is exactly right, that is sort of the initial framework, and we'll do some other things to it in order to be in compliance with current law.
Thank you.
I think it's very appropriate that we have a dashboard, that the department, by way of policy from the state board, because we do collect these data during the year, or sometime during the year, and so we have it. So let's make it public, make it available to the public, and that was the intent of the legislation. Other questions from my board members, colleagues? Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Seiberg, and we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. And this is, this item is going to be taken up in closed session today, and it's a recommendation coming from the advisory committee that considers extenuating circumstances, exceptions to our teacher licensure policies. So that is a closed item session, and we will go to the next item. The next item is the ES&P2, the policy amendment to LICN 001, and this pertains to out-of-state teacher licensing. And Dr. Tom Berlin is coming forward.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Very excited to come before you and speak about LICN 001, General Teacher Licensure Policy. Oh, before I do that, Dr. Oxendine, may I say something about the advanced teaching roles?
Please do.
So I had the opportunity last month to present just an overview of the program to the Joint Appropriations Committee on Education. They were very interested in it, and especially when we referenced the convening that we held for all the state partners, that we held it in March. And they asked, members came to me afterwards, and well, actually asked in session if they could attend that convening. And I assured them that they could, and I would also like to offer to any of the board members that if you're interested in attending the advanced teaching roles convening, that we will have our next quarterly convening, that you would all be welcome to attend.
Thank you for that invitation.
Sure. So, oh, I have to use the one that goes with it. Okay, sorry. So at last month's PEPC meeting, we discussed LICN 001. And actually, PEPC held a conference call meeting later in that month and voted on proposed policy revisions for out-of-state teacher licenses. And so I would like to review with you what those changes were and submit them for your approval. The first thing we talked about was how one qualifies for an initial professional license in the state of North Carolina. And so there are 4 ways that one could do that. You complete a North Carolina Educator Prep program and have the recommendation of that cooperating EPP. You hold a residency license and have been recommended for a professional license by the cooperating EPP. You hold a clear license for another state with 3 or more years of experience. And finally, you have completed an educator preparation program from another state, or if you did get licensed, that you have fewer than 3 years of experience. And those distinctions are important in what will be your requirements for moving from that initial license to a continuing license. So converting an IPL or an initial professional license to a continuing professional license, there are some key factors to this. One, as we have established a couple years ago in policy, the LEAs no longer have the requirement to recommend an individual for licensure. Licensure is a state function, and those conditions are met, the conditions of the state are met, and the LEAs do not have the ability to deny or approve a teacher for a state license. Second, the individual is required to have at least 3 years of teaching experience in North Carolina or verified from another state. And then finally, the individual must pass all state board approved or comparable license exams required for the license. So, of course, this phrase, comparable licensure exam, raises the issue of what is comparability. And so this needs to be defined. And so the way that Pepsi has decided to define this is that an out-of-state applicant demonstrates a score on the exam that meets or exceeds the passing score or range of scores established by the test developer. So in other words, if you are an out-of-state teacher coming to North Carolina and you submit your license as evidence of being able to teach in as the basis for a North Carolina license, you must present licensure exam scores that were used to establish that license. That cut score on that license has to meet not the state's cut score, the individual state's cut score, but the cut score that was recommended by the test developer. In some cases, this would be like, to use Georgia, for example. Georgia has its own Center for Professional Standards, Educator Professional Standards. Whatever they recommend as that cut score is the cut score that we would take. Of course, in that case, it always coincides with Georgia's their passing score. But for vendors like Praxis and Pearson, it is possible that another state could adopt their test but determine to set the cut score lower than what Praxis or Pearson would recommend. And so this is the way, so we're not considering comparability as an issue of validity or alignment. We are looking at it as it is a test that was developed, and we're going to trust that sufficient research went into the determination of the cut score to make that a valid cut score, and as long as you're meeting that valid cut score, we will recognize the test. So in this policy, I just want to remind folks that we have section 125A and then 125B. 125A is valid until June 30th. And this is one of those cases where we're phasing out a set of criteria. So teachers who came in with an expiration date before June 30th, 2019, 125A was their list of requirements. They could still fulfill those requirements and meet the state standards for conversion. But 125B will also become effective immediately on state board approval. So essentially the person could stick with the old system that they had. They may be far enough along that they don't want to do something different, or you could avail yourself of the new opportunities provided in 125B. So, for evidence of effectiveness data for out-of-state teachers, one of the stipulations in law is that any teacher coming to the state of North Carolina from out of state, in order to qualify for a continuing professional license, must provide evidence of effectiveness, such as evaluation data or student growth from the state in which they held their license. So this is an overarching requirement for any out-of-state teacher. And we've put this kind of as the preface to this section, because if you don't bring those data, it doesn't matter if you've got our same test, it doesn't matter anything else. Any teacher, 30-year teacher that doesn't bring us effectiveness data can only qualify for an IPL. And so we put it that way because even though we're listing some stipulations for when you can receive a CPL, if you don't have that effectiveness data, it doesn't matter. These are moot. So the way in which you can be issued a CPL for teachers with 3 or more years of experience, and you're coming from out of state, you have to be fully licensed in the other state. You have to have 3 or more years of experience and have met comparable testing requirements in another state. Or in lieu of those testing requirements, you could be nationally board certified if you have 3 or more years of experience. To be issued an CPL for ECGC, now that is Elementary Education and Exceptional Children General Curriculum, with 3 or more years of experience, and you're coming from out of state, your state licensure exam has to have a comparable mathematics and reading subtest. So for elementary education, we are obligated by law to have a subtest of mathematics and reading. You also must have a comparable exam in ECGC. I think I'm on the wrong, there we go. No, there we go. Sorry about that. And those scores must meet or exceed the test developer's recommended passing score. Or you can pass the North Carolina approved licensure exams. So you have all those options. For additional licensure areas, you have to have a license from another state, and you have to have a comparable test from that state. So for teachers who have fewer than 3 years of experience and are coming from out of state, those teachers would be obligated to take North Carolina's elementary education assessments. Currently, that is the Pearson Foundations of Reading, the Pearson's Mathematics, or the Praxis CKT. There is no option for those teachers with fewer than 3 years of experience to hold a license in any other way. And then for issuing an IPL in all other areas, we will allow teachers with fewer than 3 years of experience to present a comparable test for all other subjects other than elementary and ECGC. And in those cases, as we've discussed with the board earlier, in the vast majority of cases, that is a license exam either issued by a Praxis exam that is almost universally used across all other states. So the comparability issue is less important here than it is with our elementary tests, which are unique to the state of North Carolina. So we do offer teachers that are not ECGC coming to the state from out of state, if they can produce the test, a comparable test, we will issue them a North Carolina license, an IPL. And then finally, we just made some revisions to the headings of this policy. Nothing substantive there, but we just wanted to make you aware of some of the shifts in the headings. And I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have about these policy recommendations.
Yes, Mr. Ford.
I just have one question. So it says that in order to get a CPL for an out-of-state teacher, that they would have to possess a valid and current out-of-state license, and they'll demonstrate the effectiveness by providing their evaluation data. And one of those things includes student growth data, correct?
Yes.
So have we determined what exactly will be the growth threshold that will qualify one or reject somebody?
Nothing in the statute indicates a threshold. It is, the statute indicates the existence of said data, not the level of said data. Certainly that is within the board's purview to adopt a standard. That recommendation has not been made by Pepsi.
Okay, and perhaps that leads into my other question, which is when we itemize the ways to receive a CPL, CPL for elementary, I just didn't see the student growth part in there, but it is a part of the consideration.
So, right, so the way we've constructed this is that requirement for, you cannot come from out of state and get a CPL in North Carolina without effectiveness data, regardless of path. Okay. And so we set that as an overarching requirement, and then we went down into the specifics.
Okay.
So that remains intact?
That is in statute.
That's in statute.
Yes.
Okay. That clarifying point is important. Did I see a hand? Ms. Willoughby, do you have your hand raised? Anyone else? Any other questions or comments? Take me back to the slide that has something to do with national board certification. Is that in lieu of, I'm thinking about the word or at the end.
It's number 8.
Yeah. Yes, so one could, so there are some, so this is an opportunity. Let's say you're coming from a state in which there were no testing requirements. If that teacher is nationally board certified and has more than 3 years of experience, we will use that as a basis for granting them an IPL and waiving the testing requirement.
And student effectiveness data.
They would have to, well, in order to be issued a CPL, yes, they would have to have the teacher effectiveness data.
Very good. Board members, we have given due diligence as board members to this topic. Pepsi has given due diligence. I don't know how I will ever repay Patrick Miller for all the text messages I sent him last Saturday morning on a bright sunny day. The staff, Dr. Tomberlin, Dr. Petrie Martin, Dr. Seiberg, Dr. Kim Evans, all of you, my hat is off to the hard work. I think that all the discussion, and the governor's office as well, with Jeff Coltrane. I just can't say thank you enough. And I think the discussion, even it created some angst, and I had a few sleepless nights. But I think in the end, it's been good. It's been a good discussion because I've learned a lot more about licensure, out-of-state teaching license.
As have I.
I hope that I will get I hope that on my last state board member meeting that I will get a lifetime teaching license for North Carolina.
You bring the effectiveness data out.
My that I might have to work on. I don't know whether I can pull that off. I'm very rusty. But thank you very much, and board members, we will vote on this tomorrow.
Thank you.
Good work.
I heard that. We have 2 other items, discussion items, ES&P, and that deals with safety and driver's education license. And I think we have Dr. Carl Logan coming forward who will make this presentation. This is for discussion.
So good afternoon to everyone, and of course I would like to make a few comments because it is true that you all have not heard about our driver's education initiatives for a while. What you will hear today is significant. There has been significant work going on all of these issues. So the first part of this, I do believe you will hear from our licensure team. They have a part of this because we've had information go to Pepsi for their review. But then you'll also hear from the driver's education team because they have been doing significant work to implement much of the legislation around driver's education. But not only that, but just to make it a better program. So very proud of the work they've done. So I will turn it over, I believe, to Mr. Logan first, and then the licensure folks will join us as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Superintendent Johnson, Committee Chair Dr. Eisenstein, and members of the board. Thank you for this opportunity to echo what Dr. Petrie Martin has just told you. The driver education section is very excited about what we're about to share with you. We feel like this is an innovative pathway to licensure for safety and driver education, which will benefit the districts and the teachers greatly. We feel like this will probably be one of the most positively impactful things that have happened to driver education in over 30 years. So I'm going to continue to set the stage on how we arrived at this point, but then I'll have Mr. Reggie Flythe come up and he'll follow up with the program itself. I need this. As a reminder, General Statute 115C-215 requires that the superintendent organize and administer a standardized program in driver education for all public and charter, private, homeschool, and federal school students in North Carolina, while adhering to the policies and standards set by the State Board of Education. We're currently serving about 115,000 students, although upperclassmen may enroll in the program as well. Since 1992, a combination of formats have been used to provide personnel in the districts. We have in-house programs and what we call contracted programs. There have been several studies of the program, and however, in 2015, DPI, the Department of Public Instruction, requested that an assessment be done by our peers. This was sponsored by the NHTSA, and combining the findings from all of these studies has allowed us to prioritize our approach in addressing the critical needs of the program. In 2015, that assessment produced 5 areas, which is our roadmap. Collaboration with DMV and parental involvement is not shown on here, but we feel like that program oversight and education and training and the teacher certification are our most important ones. Teacher certification being the most critical of those 3. Also, in 2017, the Novice Teen Driver Education Training and Administrative Standards, what we call the national standards, were produced by the Association of National Stakeholders in Traffic Safety Education, better referred to as ANSTI. Currently, there's approximately 1,200 teachers across 115 LEAs in the state. Regarding the colleges and universities that offered the program to recommend licensure for safety and driver education, there were 3. North Carolina A&T and Appalachian State University's programs were discontinued several years ago. The last of those 3 universities, East Carolina University, taught their last cohort in 2014 and 15. Too fast. So currently there's only 2 options that remain. Both of those are with the Division Motor Vehicles. The first one, the Division Motor Vehicles Commercial School. It is a 2-week, 80-hour format and is taught across the state regionally. For professional teachers, this is a challenge. Accessibility, as they are limited locations, the cost is $250, most likely involving travel and lodging, and the cost of a substitute, which most principals' ears will perk up when you hear that. The second one, a DMV commercial school may train its teachers. However, those commercial schools serve less than 50% of all of our LEAs. Retirees account for almost 20 to 25% of those total teachers. The last count we had was about 226. What you're looking at here is a slide that shows the breakdown of our in-house programs versus our contracted programs. In 2014, 60% of those in-house programs, 60% of our total programs were in-house programs and 40% were contracted. In 2018, that has flipped. We are now at 45% in-house programs and 55% are contracted. These are currently the policies that govern driver education with this new program, none of these policies will need to be updated. This is where the rubber meets the road, if I can use a pun. As I call up Reggie Flythe, who is going to go into the program. Reggie is a former driver ed consultant here at DPI. He is retired. He's one of those retirees. Mr. Flythe.
Thank you, Mr. Logan. Board members, thank you for the opportunity to present this afternoon. The next slide talks about the course entry eligibility as it currently states in SBE policy. We don't foresee a change there. We want to start with the key component of the course that we are currently developing. Student teaching practicum, I think, is most critical. Since I left in 2015 and been involved with teacher training program, one of the things I found is that the LEAs and don't have that capacity anymore, and the commercial school programs don't do student teaching. So they train adults as they're going through the program, but I think it's a critical component that we use student teaching as a guide. And we have talked last fall with LEA coordinators throughout the state about this process, and we did not have anyone to disagree with it or provide objections. So we will work with them to establish classroom and behind-the-wheel teaching opportunities, and the LEAs will need to identify mentor teachers so that as new teachers go through our program, the mentors will be there, and the LEA has a buy-in from having a mentor teacher on staff. We will work with them to support them in their efforts to gain new teachers to teach driver ed, because across the state, believe it or not, most of the people that in the room are as older than I am. So we really need to address this issue. What we propose is teachers completing this course to receive driver education certification on their teaching license, and even we provided a way for paraprofessionals or non-teachers to complete the course to allow them to have a restricted license just to teach driver education. So as Carl talked about, there's no current option to get teacher licensure through the university system. And one of the things I did want to talk about with the motor vehicle licensure, in the western part of our state, I looked at the DMV course offering. The closest course for the people that may live in Cherokee County or Jackson, some of those western places, the closest place that they can take that course is Morganton. Identified in the assessment that we had done in 2015, there was an issue here that said that there was no standardized, evaluated, or consistent delivery of instructor training programs. We're trying to address that. We are collaborating with DMV, School Bus and Traffic Safety, to come up with this program that will satisfy the need to address the recommendations that were found in the 2015 report. We have collaborated with all stakeholders, including ANSTI. Matter of fact, next week, we have on-site technical assistance in which we will go over the program that we're proposing to do to create new teacher model here in North Carolina. What we have done is taken the model training curriculum for the teaching task instructor training program. We're going to utilize this. They gave us the ability to use it free of charge, because this issue is not only in North Carolina where the universities have gone away, it's also an issue nationwide. So we've taken the bull by the horn, so to speak, to come up with this program, and we will be one of the first states in the nation to utilize a program like this. So what we're going to do is leverage the agency adopted learning management system called Canvas. We have collaborated with our internal teams, both digital teaching and learning and the North Carolina Virtual Public Schools, who is helping us develop this course to provide blended learning modules in 5 stages. And the cost of this is $3.74 per account. The chart talks about the different stages, and the critical piece that I want to point out is the 54 hours of student teaching practicum. We want every teacher, every new teacher, to teach at least one classroom, and these are minimum standards, at least one classroom with the mentor teacher there, so that that person can give them continuous feedback about that lesson, about those lessons involved in that 30-hour classroom session. We also want an additional 24 hours of in-car student teaching time. Each student is supposed to do 6 hours of behind the wheel. So in this case, a minimum standard would be teaching 4 students, or be 2 different groups going through. That is the minimum standard. The LEA can say you need to do an additional 24 hours before licensure, or before they would send the information back to us for licensure. The cut score is 80%. The national standard is 80%. The current DMV standard is 80%. So we want to keep it at that. This is one of the most dangerous things that students do, is to get in a car and drive. We want to make sure that the teachers that are out there have gone through the process, and we want to provide the most quality standard that we can. So going back to the student teaching real quick, the evaluations, the mentor teachers will assess the teacher candidates in both classroom and behind the wheel. They will identify strengths and weaknesses, provide feedback. We will have a constant dialogue with them, and a final student practicum evaluation will be shared with us as a component of licensure. The financial impact in-house programs will continue to follow the public school personnel employee salary and benefits manual. The commitment from the districts, as I said, is $3.74 per account for LEAs who do not currently have Canvas. Driver education can absorb the cost for that. Mentor teachers, they must complete the training. So each LEA that wants to participate in the program, they provide the mentor. We'll provide the support for that, and those teachers can take our course. And we want to use that student teaching model as a guide for us. Our timeline, since the fall of 2018, we have all of our partners listed there: ANSTI, NCVPS, DTL, licensure, LEAs. We've talked with every, we've gone out to every district. Everybody had a chance to have their input about this, and also our partners over at School Bus and Traffic Safety. This spring, upon approval, we will advertise. As a matter of fact, next week we have a national, statewide driver education conference. We are going to present to all of our driver education coordinators there, and we will give them an update as to our progress to this point. In the summer of 2019, what we would like to do is pilot this program with current teachers. The ones that want to be mentors go through the program. That way we can identify the strengths and weaknesses of what we have, see what necessary adjustments we need to make, and then revise the course as needed and roll out possibly in the fall our first cohort of new teachers. Our plans are, after that, is to provide 2 courses in the fall and spring and 1 course during the summer for new teachers, new driver education teachers. So Pepsi approved for your consideration. We went with them several times last month. We would like for you to provide to give your blessing on a pathway to obtain safety and driver education licensure add-on for certified teachers, and provide a pathway for those paraprofessionals who may be interested in teaching driver education. So with that, we appreciate your time and would like to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from my colleagues? Mr. Gobson.
I don't have a question. I feel like I've witnessed a master class in leadership and change management. The degree to which you all identified a problem, worked with our publics to find a solution. I have, my youngest is 17. There's not much more important than making sure we have kids behind wheels who knows what they're doing and teachers who can teach them. The way you brought innovation and technology, the seriousness with which you're taking the training of the drivers. I mean, this is just one of the more impressive things that I've seen at the board table. And so I appreciate, I guess I'm echoing Dr. Petrie-Martin here, I just appreciate the degree to which you're supporting our constituencies, people across the state, and to which you've brought innovation and a real seriousness of purpose to this, and it's impressive.
We thank you very much. We're just following leadership. Superintendent Johnson, Dr. Petrie-Martin, and Dr. Ben Matthews, who just retired, and I know that the leadership will continue on. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Godwin, you have a question or a comment?
I just wanted to comment. I want to thank you for including paraprofessionals in the narrative. I'm a former bus driver, and I know a lot of the paraprofessionals are bus drivers, and they have to go through intensive training to be a bus driver. Who better to be offered an opportunity to train our children to drive? So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Before coming to DPI, Reggie and I both were, he was a coordinator for driver education for Wake County schools, and I was with Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. So between the two of us, we've seen it all. We know exactly what needs to be done. So thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. McDevitt.
Lisa, I too am a former bus driver. Way back there. I just wanted to commend JB for elevating that. I think that's a good way to say that. You look at a problem and you address it, and you. The only thing I would add to it is that his 17-year-old, you might need to begin to embed drones and driverless vehicles and those kinds of things in that future way out there. But his 17-year-old will see it.
Thank you for that. We'll put that in our notes.
My only question would be, do you anticipate any challenges recruiting teachers? I mean, could you address that?
There is always a challenge. Mm-hmm. But I think part of the challenge that I see, there are people who go through the DMV course but don't have the opportunity to do that student teaching piece. Mm-hmm. And there is no support for them. And I've seen people coming to the fold, get a license, do the work, and leave within 30 days. As far as the number of people, I don't think, Dr. Oxendine, we will, but it does provide a pathway for those places who are in dire need for them.
It does.
So for those LEAs and those superintendents out there and school boards who want to participate, we certainly will be able to provide them the opportunity.
You will have a pool of teachers, I'm sure of that. We look forward to hearing more about the successes, and I'm so happy that you are, you know, your model is so consistent with the way we prepare teachers, with the mentor and with the student teaching piece. So I applaud you for that. It's very consistent with who we are and what we believe in education. Very good. Thank you. And then we have one other item, and this is pertaining to, this is CTED 004.
I'm going to let everyone know where it's located in policy.
Oh, okay.
So under special subject areas, the safety and driver education license, the requirements itself will be listed under in LICN 001, and they will include complete 134 hours of coursework hours, which includes the 80 hours of blended learning coursework and includes the 54 hours of student teaching, the minimum of the 30 hours of classroom experience, and the minimum of 24 hours of in-car instruction experience. And then within 001, LICN 001 and 003, it will list the pass all course assessments and the program exam, the safety and traffic education, program test with a score of 80% or higher. Any questions about that?
Questions?
And then, in addition to those changes, two other changes that have to do with Ed TPA and PPAT assessment as requested by the field and after NCDPI reviewed data to determine that the cut scores for Ed TPA and PPAT will remain the same as what is presently used for 2018 to 2019 for the upcoming school year, 2019-2020. And this is to provide a much more smooth transition for it becoming consequential this coming year, or this year. And then also moving the consequential date for EPPs, and that would be changed from July 1st to 2019 to September 1st, 2019. And this would allow flexibility for summer programs for those teacher candidates to finish their programs through the end of summer. And this was also requested by the field. Any questions about that?
Any questions? The only question, it's not really a question, it's really a request. At some point, I think the board would benefit from having maybe an issues session or a new business item on the Ed TPA, because that's really major in our EPPs, and it becomes consequential this year.
Yes, September 1st.
And I don't know whether this is in board policy. I should know this, but I don't. I'll admit that. Or statute, or if it's just campus institutional. I'm hearing that a candidate must pass Ed TPA in order to graduate.
In order to
Is it a graduation? That must
to be able to convert a license. So if they didn't graduate with it, if the EPP didn't require it before they graduated, then they could. It would be transferred over to as if it was a licensure exam. It would be a requirement. Attempt in the first, pass in the second.
I see.
I was just gonna clarify, and she accurately portrayed it. It would be similar to a licensure exam. Under current statute, you would be required to attempt the exam in the first year and pass by the end of the second. EPPs would have the option to withhold their recommendation, as they do now, if a candidate did not pass either the licensure exam or the Ed TPA. But there would be avenues for the candidate to continue on into the profession that is under a residence license if they did not pass those courses.
All right, thank you for that clarification. I do think maybe a session on that in the future would be beneficial to the board. Other questions or comments of Dr. Evans?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I raced ahead of you a little bit. So now it's time to go to the last item, and this is CTED 004, and it pertains to changes in the CTE manual, and we have our presenter.
Hi, I'm Lee O'Neill. I'm the Southeast Regional Coordinator for CTE, and one of my statewide responsibilities is to facilitate, manage the CTE licensure manual. Clicker? Oh, sorry. So just as a reminder, CTED 004 governs teacher candidates who want to pursue a CTE restricted license. That means we hire them based on a related degree and related work experience. We also in this policy cover adding CTE areas to existing licenses and adding CTE support services licenses. Bachelor degree candidates for CTE may also pursue a residency license, and that is governed under LICN 001. And that's on my first slide, so click again. So I'm just going to quickly go through the updates that we are requesting. You have a copy of the slide deck, you have the strike-through version of the manual, and you have a summary of changes document that also lists these same things. In the introduction, we just did some minor updates referring to LIC 001 for guidance for educators who don't meet the licensing requirements within 3 years. We want CTE licensed professionals to follow the same rules for any other educator who didn't meet their licensing requirements. We added clarification that CTE restricted licenses should come from candidates who have related degrees that are from regionally accredited colleges and universities. We removed references to lateral entry as it's no longer an option. And then we just moved some text around to make it prominent that the CTE new teacher induction requirement is required for CTE teachers pursuing a CTE restricted license. In the business and finance license, we just added examples of related degrees and related work experience. We did the same thing in the IT license. As you know, job titles change, degrees change, and so this is helpful to DPI licensure and local licensure staff as they're examining potential candidates for hire. In the Family and Consumer Science General License, we clarified the wording on the credentials so that we could accept a variety of credentials as long as they are approved by this governing body, the ANSI CFP Accredited Food Protection Manager. So not just one credential, given more options. In apparel, we added examples of related degrees. In the culinary license, again, that same wording on clarifying the credential. In our health science RN license, this is a really good change. We've lowered the work experience requirement to 2 years. Within the past 5, it had been 3. We have a lot of difficulty in recruiting RNs out of hospitals and doctors' offices, as you can imagine. So this will be a good recruitment tool. And then we just removed a section that was blank because we didn't need it in there. For the non-RN license, we also put that to 2 years within the past 5 to help with recruitment. We added some additional related degree and work experience. And we clarified that the praxis in health ed could be used in lieu of an industry credential. This particular license is mostly clinical background. However, we do have a variety of folks out in the field who have health educator degrees. They're coming from public health. So without having a license as a respiratory technologist or something like that, that would let them show us competency in the area, and they do make good educators. In the biotech license, we removed an example of work experience and removed the notes section. In marketing, we tried to really differentiate between the business and marketing licenses, so we removed some examples out of there that were more closely aligned to the business license and didn't really align to the marketing license, and updated some work experience there. In the Trade and Industrial Collision Repair license, we changed the name of the credential as it's been changed by the vendor, and this particular vendor actually changed their credential to an educator credential that has pedagogy embedded in the credential. So we like that better, and that helps validate their experience. And then we also changed the requirement of the credential to, instead of having it at hire prior to teaching, they can get it during that initial licensing period. The vendor is okay with that, and that does help with recruitment. Just had a typo in automotive services. Being very transparent here. In the section on adding CTE areas, we clarified the narrative to help understanding out in the field that any teacher with a clear license can add a CTE area. The same options apply that are in LICN 001 for any other teacher adding an area. We do have an extra option in CTE. In some areas you can add by credential. We removed one option to add by credential because honestly it was an error in the previous manual. We did add that 721 license is the one I was talking about where you can take a health educator praxis. So we may have a science teacher, for example, who might want to add a health education license and come on over to CTE. So with that praxis, they would be able to add that 721 area and be ready to teach in that program area. We changed the name of a credential because it had been changed by the vendor, and we were missing one of the credentials from the automotive license, so we made sure it was in the table. For adding CTE areas provisionally, we just strengthened the language that we put in there last year, saying that some areas cannot be added provisionally due to student safety. And most of those are in the trade and industrial area where we have heavy equipment, and we want to make sure that we have a fully licensed teacher experienced using that equipment before we put them with students. In the support services license area, we clarified there too that they have to have certain criteria prior to hire or prior to adding the area provisionally. So one of those licenses is a career development coordinator license. We just did a little cleanup around the text in that license area. But for example, we want to make sure that they had certain educator licenses and certain experiences in education prior to being eligible to add this license provisionally. The instructional management coordinator license, we're updating the name of that license. This role is shifting to one that includes instructional coaching, so we're adding the word curriculum and instructional management coordinator to the license name. We are clarifying that the work experience that has to be related. And then we have embedded instructional coaching into our course, our induction that we use for this license, but we're finding a lot of instructional coaches already have that training, so we're going to break it out so that people don't have to repeat it. We'll still be offering it for those that don't have it, but if they have it, we don't want to make them sit through it again. The Special Populations Coordinator license, again, just some related work experience and cleanup there. But we are adding a new course with your approval, similar to the inductions that we have for the CTE Director, the Career Development Coordinator, the Instructional Management Coordinator. We would like to offer a specific course on how to be a Special Populations Coordinator, and this would, they could choose this in lieu of 6 hours of college credit. That concludes our requested changes. I'll be happy to answer any questions or address any concerns that you may have.
Questions, concerns, comments? It was an excellent presentation. I would like to hire you to do my proofreading.
I don't know. You know, I had that extra S on the automotive license. You know,
well,
I might have
but
to.
you noted it. You noted it, my
I
dear,
did note
and
it.
that was great. I do have a couple of questions.
Sure.
The category instructional
management coordinator
and the special population,
yes.
Are those positions school-based or district office?
It can be both. It could be one or the other, or we have larger districts will have a district-wide IMC, Instructional Management Coordinator, and then they'll sometimes have combined roles in the schools where you might put a Career Development Coordinator and an IMC together and they do a combined role. Our career development coordinators are the ones that CTE funds to provide those career exploration activities. So a lot of the information that you heard from my colleagues this morning, well, it wasn't this morning, but it feels like it, doesn't it? Earlier this afternoon. Those are the roles that we provide in CTE to do that work with career awareness, career exploration, and help students understand those plans. And they work very collaboratively with guidance counselors in the schools.
Well, I'm just amazed at the fine-tuned work that goes into the manuals, the CTE manuals.
We try to make it really easy for DPI licensure and licensure staff in the field to understand.
It must be that way. Thank you very much. And that, unless we have comments of Ms. O'Neill, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that concludes ES&P.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. I'll now recognize Ms. Willoughby for our last committee report of the day on healthy, responsible students.
Could I also point out historically, since Tricia and I's our first 100 years on this board, I just want to make sure that JB knows that on the blur the lines comment that we made, we've made some progress. Truly, for our first 10 years, the board had to adjourn as a State Board of Education and reconvene as the CTE Board of Education on any CTE matter that we took up. We had to adjourn as one board and reconvene as the other board by statute. So the fact that we've begun to even talk about these at the same table, I think is at least some progress.
Well, CTE is massive.
Oh.
It's almost, it could be its own.
It is, but at least we're beginning to
But
make
it's
some progress.
interesting to know that.
Naomi? The last item of the day is our monthly safety update, and Kim Martin is here to provide an update. Or not? You're not Kim Martin. No, you're not Kim Martin.
Chief of Staff. I've been fortunate to get involved in a very important project, a major priority for the superintendent, for this board, and for our state. I'm happy to give a brief update, and if we need more detail, we probably have to go into closed session to discuss it. But the RFP has been canceled as of last Wednesday, and we are currently in very positive contract negotiations with a group that I think this board's going to be very pleased to hear the update on. So if you'd like to do that, that's great, but we're hoping to have contract negotiations finish up by the end of the month and be ready to make some big announcements soon, early in May.
Let me suggest that we go ahead and hold that for closed session since we're there anyway and get the very brief update for now. And,
Be happy to. Thanks.
That's it for HRS.
okay, very
And
good.
I forgot to say that Mr. Keenan is the vice chair of that committee, so it was easy today.
Mr. Keenan needs no introduction in
No,
that
he
role.
doesn't. He doesn't.
All right, well, thank you, Ms. Willoughby, and many thanks to board members, Superintendent Johnson, to our DPI staff, both those who still remain, special commendation, and to those who have departed but contributed much to the meeting, and other contributors for participating in today's meeting. We had some excellent contributors who came in from other places and not on our staff who also made some very meaningful comments. So thank you to everyone for all that work. At this time, I turn to Mr. McDevitt and ask for a motion to go into closed session, and would note for the audience and online listeners that following closed session, the April 3, 2019 meeting will adjourn immediately thereafter.
Mr. Chair, I move that the State Board of Education go into closed session to consult with our attorneys on attorney-client privilege matters, including Carter G. Woodson versus State Board of Education, K.I. by and through her parent, J.I. versus Durham Public Schools Board of Education and the North Carolina State Board of Education, and to consider Hope County versus State of North Carolina and the North Carolina State Board of Education. So moved.
Second. And as we go to a roll call on this, I will assert once again the previous recusal that the board has allowed with respect to that, with what we call the Leandro litigation for shorthand report. Dr. Townsend Smith, could you call the roll, please, for the motion in closed session?
Yes. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Ms. Willoughby?
Yes.
Mr. McDevitt?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes. Thank you. We have unanimous vote. Why don't we reconvene at 20 till 5?
Yeah.